Chapter 25 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Looking back, he could understand everything easily. The horse was the main objective of Pollard. He had won the money so as to tempt Terry to gamble with the value of the blood bay. But by fair means or foul, he intended to have El Sangre. And now, the moment his men were in place, a change came over Pollard. He straightened in the chair. A slight outthrust of his lower jaw made his face strangely brutal, conscienceless, and his cloudy agate eyes were unreadable. "Look here, Terry," he argued calmly, but Terry could see that the voice was raised so that it would undubitably reach the ears of the farthest of the four men. "I don't mind letting a gambling debt ride when a gent ain't got anything more to put up for covering his money. But when a gent has got more, I figure he ought to cover with it." Unreasoning anger swelled in the throat of Terry Hollis, the same blind passion which had surged in him before he started up at the Cornish table and revealed himself to the sheriff. And the similarity was what sobered him. It was the hunger to battle, to kill, and it seemed to him that Black Jack had stepped out of the old picture and now stood behind him, tempting him to strike. Another covert signal from Pollard. Every one of the four men turned toward him. The chances of Terry were diminished, 9 out of 10, for each of those four, he shrewdly guessed, was a practiced gunman. Cold reason came to Terry's assistance. "I told you when I was broke," he said gently. "I told you that I was through. You told me to go on." "I figured you was kidding me," said Pollard harshly. "I knew you still had El Sangre back. Son, I'm a kind sort of man, I am. I've got a name for it." In spite of himself, a faint and cruel smile flicked at the corners of his mouth as he spoke. He became grave again. "But there's some things I can't stand. There's some things that I hate worse than I hate poison. I won't say what one of 'em is. I leave it to you, and I ask you to keep in the game. $1,000 against a horse. Ain't that more than fair?" He no longer took pains to disguise his voice. It was hard and heavy, and rang into the ear of Terry, and the latter, feeling that his hour had come, looked deliberately around the room and took note of every guarded exit, the four men now openly on watch for any action on his part. Pollard himself sat erect on the edge of his chair, and his right hand had disappeared beneath the table. "Suppose I throw the coin this time," he suggested. "By God!" thundered Pollard, springing to his feet and throwing off the mask completely. "You damned skunk! Are you accusing me of crooking the throw of the coin?" Terry waited for the least moment, waited in a dull wonder to find himself unafraid. But there was no fear in him. There was only a cold, methodical calculation of chances. He told himself deliberately that no matter how fast Pollard might be, he would prove the faster. He would kill Pollard, and he would undoubtedly kill one of the others. And they, beyond the shadow of a doubt, would kill him. He saw all this as in a picture. "Pollard," he said, more gently than before, "you'll have to eat that talk." A flash of bewilderment crossed the face of Pollard, then rage, then that slight contraction of the features which in some men precedes a violent effort. But the effort did not come. While Terry literally wavered on tiptoe, his nerves straining for the pull of his gun and the leap to one side as he sent his bullet home, a deep, unmusical voice cut in on them. "Just hold yourself up a minute, will you, Joe?" Terry looked up. On the balcony in front of the sleeping rooms of the second story, his legs spread apart, his hands shoved deep into his trouser pockets, his shapeless black hat crushed on the back of his head, and a broad smile on his ugly face, stood his nemesis, Denver the Yegg. Pollard sprang back from the table and spoke with his face still turned to Terry. "Pete," he called, "come in." But Denver, alias Shorty, alias Pete, merely laughed. "Come in nothing, you fool. Joe, you're about half a second from hell, and so's a couple more of you. Don't you know who the kid is, huh? I'll tell you, boys. It's the kid that dropped old Minter. It's the kid that beat foxy Joe Minter to the draw. It's young Hollis. Why, you damned blind men, look at his face. It's the son of Black Jack. It's Black Jack himself come back to us." Joe Pollard let his hand fall away from his gun. He gaped at Terry as though he were seeing a ghost. He came a long pace nearer and let his arms fall on the table where they supported his weight. "Black Jack," he kept whispering. "Black Jack? God above, are you Black Jack's son?" And the bewildered Terry answered: "I'm his son, whatever you think, and be damned to you all. I'm his son, and I'm proud of it. Now get your gun." But Joe Pollard became a great catapult that shot across the table and landed beside Terry. Two vast hands swallowed the hands of the younger man and crushed them to numbness. "Proud of it? God A'mighty, boy, why wouldn't you be? Black Jack's son. Pete, thank God you come in time." "In time to save your head for you, Joe." "I believe it," said the big man humbly. "I believed he would have cleaned up on me, maybe on all of us. Black Jack would have come close to doing it. But you come in time, Pete, and I'll never forget it." While he spoke, he was still wringing the hands of Terry. Now he dragged the stunned Terry around the table and forced him down in his own huge padded armchair, his sign of power. But it was only to drag him up from the chair again. "Let me look at you. Black Jack's boy, huh? As like Black Jack as ever I seen, too. But a shade taller, huh, Pete? A shade taller. And a shade heavier in the shoulders. But you got the look. I might have knowed you by the look in your eyes. Hey, Slim, damn your good-for-nothing hide, drag Johnny here pronto by the back of his neck." Johnny the Chinaman appeared, blinking at the lights. Joe Pollard clamped him on the shoulder with staggering force. "Johnny, you see," a broad gesture to Terry, "old friend, just find out. Very old friend. Like pretty much a whole damn lot. Get down in the cellar, you yeller old sinner, and get out the oldest bourbon I've got there. You savvy? Pretty damn pronto. Hurry up, quick, old keg. Get out." Johnny was literally hurled out of the room toward the kitchen, trailing a crackle of strange-sounding but unmistakable profanity behind him. And Joe Pollard, perching his bulk on the edge of the table, introduced Terry to the boys again. For Oregon had come back with word that Kate would be out soon. "Here's Denver Pete. You know him already, and he's worth his weight in any man's company. Here's Slim Dugan, that could scent a big coin shipment 1,000 miles away. Phil Marvin ain't any slouch at stalling a gent with a fat wallet and leading him up to be plucked. Marty Cardiff ain't half so tame as he looks, and he's the best trailer that ever squinted at a buzzard in the sky. He knows this whole country like a book. And Oregon Charlie is the best all-around man you ever seen, from railroads to stages. And me, I'm sort of a handyman. Well, Black Jack, your old man himself never got a finer crew together than this, eh?" Denver Pete had waited until his big friend finished. Then he remarked quietly, "All very pretty, partner, but Terry figures he walks the straight and narrow path. Savvy?" "Just a kid's fool hunch," snorted Joe Pollard. "Didn't your dad show me the ropes? Wasn't it him that taught me all I ever knew? Sure it was, and I'm going to do the same for you, Terry. Damn my eyes if I ain't. And here I've been sitting, trimming you. Son, take back the coin. I was sure playing a cheap game, and I apologize, man to man." But Terry shook his head. "You won it," he said quietly. and you keep it." "Won nothing. I can call every coin I throw. I was stealing, not gambling. I was gold digging. Take back the stuff." "If I was fool enough to lose it that way, it'll stay lost," answered Terry. "But I won't keep it, son." "Then give it away, but not to me." "Black Jack," began Pollard. But he received a signal from Denver Pete and abruptly changed the subject. "Let it go, then. There's plenty of loose coin rolling about this day. If you've got a thin purse today, I'll make it fat for you in a week. But think of me stumbling onto you." It was the first time that Terry had a fair opportunity to speak, and he made the best of it. "It's very pleasant to meet you on this basis," he said. "But as for taking up the road life—" The lifted hand of Joe Pollard made it impossible for him to complete his sentence. "I know you got scruples, son. Sure you got 'em. I used to have 'em too, till your old man got 'em out of my head." Terry winced, but Joe Pollard rambled on, ignorant that he had struck a blow in the dark. "When I met up with the original Black Jack, I was slaving my life away with a pick, trying to turn ordinary quartz into pay dirt. Making a fool of myself, that's what I was doing. Along comes Black Jack. He needed a man. He picks me up and takes me along with him. I tried to talk Bible talk. He showed me where I was a fool. 'All you got to do,' he says to me, 'is make sure you ain't stealing from an honest man. And they's about one gent in three with money that's come by it honest in this part of the world. The rest is just plain thieves, but they've been clever enough to cover it up. Pick on that crew, Pollard, and squeeze 'em till they run money into your hand. I'll show you how to do it.' Well, it come pretty hard to me at first. I didn't see how it was done, but he showed me. He'd send a scout around to a mining camp. If they was a crooked wheel in the gambling house that was making a lot of coin, Black Jack would slide in some night, stick up the works, and clean out with the loot. If they was some dirty dog that had jumped a claim and was making a pile of coin out of it, Black Jack would drop out of the sky onto him and take the gold." Terry listened, fascinated. He was having the workings of his father's mind recreated for him and spread plainly before his eyes. And there was a certain terror and also a certain attractiveness about what he discovered. It sounds maybe like an easy thing to do, just to stick on the trail of them that you know are worse crooks than you. But it ain't. I've tried it. I've seen Black Jack pass up 10,000 like it was nothing, because the gent that had it come by it honest. But I can't do it, speaking in general. But I'll tell you more about the old man." "Thank you," said Terry, "but—" "And when you're with us—" "You see," said Terry firmly, "I plan to do the work you asked me to do. Kill what you wanted killed on the range. And when I've worked off the money I owe you—" Before he could complete his sentence, a door opened on the far side of the room, and Kate Pollard entered again. She had risen from her bed in some haste to answer the summons of her father. Her bright hair poured across her shoulders. A heavy greenish-blue dressing gown was drawn about her and held close with one hand at her breast. She came slowly toward them, and she seemed to Terry to have changed. There was less of the masculine about her than there had been earlier in the evening. Her walk was slow. Her eyes were wide, as though she had no idea what might await her, and the light glinted white on the untanned portion of her throat and on her arm, where the loose sleeve of the dressing gown fell back from it. "Kate," said her father, "I had to get you up to tell you the big news. Biggest news you ever heard of. Girl, who have I always told you was the greatest gent that ever come into my life?" "Jack Hollis, Black Jack," she said without hesitation. "According to your way of thinking, Dad." Plainly, her own conclusions might be very different. "According to anybody's way of thinking, as long as they was thinking right. And do you know who we've got here with us now? Could you guess in 1,000 years? Why, the kid that come tonight. Black Jack as sure as if he were a picture out of a book, and me a blind fool that didn't know him. Kate, here's the second Black Jack, Terry Hollis. Give him your hand again, and say you're glad to have him for his dad's sake and for his own. Kate, he's done a man's job already. It's him that dropped old Foxy Minter." The last of these words faded out of the hearing of Terry. He felt the lowered eyes of the girl rise and fall gravely on his face, and her glance rested there a long moment with a new and solemn questioning. Then her hand went slowly out to him, a cold hand that barely touched his with its fingertips, and then dropped away. But what Terry felt was that it was the same glance she had turned to him when she stood leaning against the post earlier that evening. There was pity in it, and a sort of despair which he could not understand. And without saying a word, she turned her back on them and went out of the room as slowly as she had come into it. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. "It don't mean nothing," Pollard hastened to assure Terry. "It don't mean a thing in the world except that she's a fool girl. The queerest, orneriest, kindest, strangest, wildest thing in the shape of calico that ever come into these parts since her mother died before her. But the more you see of her, the more you'll value her. She can ride like a man, no wear out to her, and she's got the courage of a man. Besides which, she can sling a gun like it would do your heart good to see her. Don't take nothing she does to heart. She don't mean no harm, but she sure does tangle up a gent's ideas. Here I've been living with her nigh on 20 years, and I don't savvy her none yet. Huh, boys?" "I'm not offended in the least," said Terry quietly. And he was not. But he was more interested than he had ever been before by man, woman, or child. And for the past few seconds his mind had been following her through the door behind which she had disappeared. "And if I were to see more of her, no doubt," he broke off with, "but I'm not apt to see much more of any of you, Mr. Pollard. If I can't stay here and work off that $300 debt—" "Work, hell! No son of Black Jack Hollis can work for me, but he can live with me as a partner, son, and he can have everything I got, half and half, and the bigger half to him if he asks for it. That's straight." Terry raised a protesting hand, yet he was touched, intimately touched. He had tried hard to fit in his place among the honest people of the mountains by hard and patient work. They would have none of him. His own kind turned him out. And among these men who had no laws, as he had every reason to believe, he was instantly taken in and made one of them. "But no more talk tonight," said Pollard. "I can see you're played out. I'll show you to your room." He caught a lantern from the wall as he spoke and began to lead the way up the stairs to the balcony. He pointed out the advantages of the house as he spoke. "Not half bad, this house, eh?" he said proudly. "And who'd you think planned it? Your old man, kid. It was Black Jack Hollis himself that done it. He was took off sudden before he had a chance to work it out and build it. But I've used his idea in this, the same as I've done in other things. His idea was a house like a ship. They build a ship in compartments, huh? Ship hits a rock, water comes in, but it only fills one compartment, and the old ship still floats. Same with this house. You see them walls? And the walls on the outside ain't the only thing. Every partition is the same thing, pretty near, and a gent could stand behind these doors safe as if he was a mile away from a gun. Why? Because there's a nice little lining of the best steel you ever seen in the middle of 'em. Cost a lot? Sure. But look at us now. Suppose a posse was to rush the house. They burst into the kitchen side. Where are they? Just the same as if they hadn't gotten in at all. I bolt the doors from the inside of the big room and they're shut out again. Or suppose they take the big room. Then a couple of us slide out onto this balcony and spray 'em with lead. This house ain't going to be took till the last room is filled full of sheriff's men." He paused on the balcony and looked proudly over the big baronial room below them. It seemed huger than ever from this viewpoint, and the men below them were dwarfed. The light of the lanterns did not extend all the way across it, but fell in pools here and there, gleaming faintly on the men below. "But doesn't it make people suspicious to have a fort like this built on the hill?" asked Harry. "Of course, if they knew. But they don't know, son, and they ain't going to find out the lining of this house till they try it out with lead." He brought Terry into one of the bedrooms and lighted a lamp. As the flare steadied in the big circular oil burner and the light spread, Terry made out a surprisingly comfortable apartment. There was not a bunk but a civilized bed, beside which was a huge tawny mountain lion skin softening the floor. The window was curtained in some pleasant blue stuff, and there were a few spots of color on the wall, only calendars some of them, but helping to give a livable impression for the place. "Kate's work," grinned Pollard proudly. "She's been fixing these rooms up all out of her own head. Never got no ideas out of me. Anything you might lack, son?" Terry told him he would be very comfortable, and the big man wrung his hand again as he bade him good night. "The best work that Denver ever done was bringing you to me," he declared. "Which you'll find it out before I'm through. I'm going to give you a home." And he strode away before Terry could answer. The rather rare consciousness of having done a good deed swelled in the heart of Joe Pollard on his way down from the balcony. When he reached the floor below, he found that the four men had gone to bed and left Denver alone, drawn back from the light into a shadowy corner where he was flanked by the gleam of a bottle of whiskey on the one side and a shimmering glass on the other. Although Pollard was the nominal leader, he was in secret awe of the yegg, for Denver was an in and outer. Sometimes he joined them in the West. Sometimes he worked in Eastern territory. He came and went as he pleased, and was more or less a law unto himself. Moreover, he had certain qualities of silence and brooding that usually disturbed the leader. They troubled him now as he approached the squat, shapeless figure in the corner chair. "What do you think of him?" said Denver. "A good kid, and a clean-cut kid," decided Joe Pollard judiciously. "Maybe he ain't another Black Jack, but he's tolerable cool for a youngster. Stood up and looked me in the eye like a man when I had him cornered a while back. Good thing for him you come out when you did." "A good thing for you, Joe," replied Denver Pete. "He'd have turned you into fertilizer, Bo." "Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they's some things I could teach him about gunslinging, Pete." "Maybe, maybe not," parodied Denver. "You've learned a good deal about guns, Joe, quite a bit. But there's some things about gunfighting that nobody can learn. It's got to be born into 'em. Remember how Black Jack used to slide out his gat?" "Yep, there was a man." "And Minter, too. There's a born gunman." "Sure, we all know Uncle Joe, damn his soul." "But the kid beat Uncle Joe fair and square from an even break, and beat him bad. Made his draw, held it so Joe could part way catch up with him, and then drilled him clean." Pollard scratched his chin. "I'd believe that if I'd seen it," he declared. "Pal, it wasn't Terry that done the talking. It was Gainor. He seen a good deal of gunplay and said that Terry was the coolest he ever watched." "All right for that part of it," replied Joe Pollard. "Suppose he's fast, but can I use him? I like him well enough. I'll give him a good deal. But is he going to mean charity all the time he hangs out with me?" "Maybe, maybe not," chuckled Denver again. "Use him the way he can be used, and he'll be the best bargain you ever turned. Black Jack started you in business. Black Jack the Second will make you rich if you handle him right, and ruin you if you make a slip." "How come? He talks this honesty talk pretty strong." "Give me a chance to talk," said Denver contemptuously. "Takes a gent that's used to reading the secrets of a safe to read the secrets of a gent's head. And I've read the secret of young Black Jack Hollis. He's a pile of dry powder, Joe. Throw in the spark and he'll explode so damned loud they'll hear him go off all over the country." "How?" "First, you got to keep him here." "How?" Joe Pollard sat back with the air of one who will be convinced through no mental effort of his own. But Denver was equal to the demand. "I'm going to show you. He thinks he owes you $300." "That's foolish. I cheated the kid out of it. I'll give it back to him and all the rest I won." Denver paused and studied the other as one amazed by such stupidity. "Pal, did you ever try in the old days to give anything to the old Black Jack?" Well, he sure hated charity, but this ain't charity." "It ain't in your eyes. It is in Terry's. If you insist, he'll get sore. No, Joe, let him think he owes you that money. Let him start in working it off for you. Honest work. You ain't got any ranch work. Well, set him to cutting down trees or anything that'll help to hold him. If he makes some gambling play, and he's got the born gambler in him, you got one last thing that'll be apt to keep him here." "What's that?" "Kate." Pollard stirred in his chair. "How do you mean that?" he asked gruffly. "I mean what I said," retorted Denver. "I watched young Black Jack looking at her. He had his heart in his eyes, the kid did. He likes her in spite of the frosty mitt she handed him. Oh, he's falling for her, pal, and he'll keep on falling. Just slip the word to Kate to kid him along, will you? And after we've got him glued to the place here, we'll figure out the way to turn Terry into a copy of his dad. We'll figure out how to shoot the spark into the powder, and then stand clear for the explosion." Denver came silently and swiftly out of the chair, his pudgy hands spread on the table and his eyes gleaming close to the face of Pollard. "Joe," he said softly, "if that kid goes wrong, he'll be as much as his father ever was, and maybe more. He'll rake in the money like it was dirt. How do I know? Because I've talked to him. I've watched him and trailed him. He's trying hard to go straight. He's failed twice. The third time he'll bust and throw in with us. And if he does, he'll clean up the coin, and we'll get our share. Why ain't you made more money yourself, Joe? You've got as many men as Black Jack ever had. It's because you ain't got the fire in you. Neither have I. We're nothing but tools ready for another man to use the way Black Jack used us. Nurse this kid along a little while, and he'll show us how to pry open the places where the real coin is cached away. And he'll lead us in and out with no danger to us and all the real risk on his own head. That's his way. That was his dad's way before him." Pollard nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. I know I am. He's a gold mine, this kid is. But we got to buy him with something more than gold, and I know what that something is. I'm going to show him that the good, law-abiding citizens have made up their minds that he's no good, that they're all against him, and when he finds that out, he'll go wild. There ain't no doubt of it. He'll show his teeth, and when he shows his teeth, he'll taste blood. There ain't no doubt of it." "Going to make him kill?" asked Pollard very softly. "Why not? He'll do it sooner or later anyway. It's in his blood." "I suppose it is." "I got an idea. There's a young gent in town named Larrimer, ain't there?" "Sure. A rough kid, too. It was him that killed Kennedy last spring." "And he's proud of his reputation?" "Sure. He'd go 100 miles to have a fight with a gent with a good name for gunplay." "Then hark to me sing, Joe. Send Terry into town to get something for you. I'll drop in ahead of him and find Larrimer, and tell Larrimer that Black Jack's son is around, the man that dropped Sheriff Minter. Then I'll bring 'em together and give 'em a running start." "And risk Terry getting his head blown off?" If he can't beat Larrimer, he's no use to us. If he kills Larrimer, it's good riddance. The kid is going to get bumped off sometime, anyway. He's bad all the way through." Pollard looked with a sort of wonder on his companion. "You're a nice, kind sort of gent, ain't you, Denver?" "I'm a money maker," asserted Denver coldly, "and just now Terry Hollis is my gold mine. Watch me work him." End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. It was some time before Terry could sleep, though it was now very late. When he put out the light and slipped into the bed, the darkness brought a bright flood of memories of the day before him. It seemed to him that half a lifetime had been crowded into the brief hours since he was fired on the ranch that morning. Behind everything stirred the ugly face of Denver as a sort of controlling nemesis. It seemed to him that the chunky little man had been pulling the wires all the time while he, Terry Hollis, danced in response. Not a flattering thought. Nervously, Terry got out of bed and went to the window. The night was cool, cut crisp rather than chilling. His eyes went over the velvet blackness of the mountain slope above him to the ragged line of the crest, then a dizzying plunge to the brightness of the stars beyond. The very sense of distance was soothing. It washed the gloom and the troubles away from him. He breathed deep of the fragrance of the pines and then went back to his bed. He had hardly taken his place in it when the sleep began to well up over his brain, waves of shadows running out of corners of his mind, and then suddenly he was wide awake, alert. Someone had opened the door. There had been no sound, merely a change in the air currents of the room. But there was also the sense of another presence, so clearly that Terry almost imagined he could hear the breathing. He was beginning to shrug the thought away and smile at his own nervousness when he heard that unmistakable sound of a foot pressing the floor. And then he remembered that he had left his gun belt far from the bed. In a burning moment that lesson was printed in his mind and would never be forgotten. Slowly as possible and without sound, he drew up his feet little by little, spread his arms gently on either side of him, and made himself tense for the effort. Whoever it was that entered, they might be taken by surprise. He dared not lift his head to look. And he was on the verge of leaping up and at the approaching noise, when a whisper came to him softly, "Black Jack?" The soft voice, the name itself, thrilled him. He sat erect in the bed and made out dimly the form of Kate Pollard in the blackness. She would have been quite invisible, save that the square of the window was almost exactly behind her. He made out the faint whiteness of the hand which held her dressing robe at the breast. She did not start back, though she showed that she was startled by the suddenness of his movement, by growing the faintest shade taller and lifting her head a little. Terry watched her, bewildered. "I've been waiting to see you," said Kate. "I want I mean, to talk to you." He could think of nothing except to blurt with sublime stupidity, "It's good of you. Won't you sit down?" The girl brought him to his senses with a sharp, "Easy. Don't talk out. Do you know what would happen if Dad found me here?" Began Terry. But she helped him smoothly to the logical conclusion. "He'd blow your head off, Black Jack, and he'd do it pronto. If you are going to talk, talk soft, like me." She sat down on the side of the bed so gently that there was no creaking. They peered at each other through the darkness for a time. She was not whispering, but her voice was pitched almost as low, and he wondered at the variety of expression she was able to pack in the small range of that murmur. "I suppose I'm a fool for coming, but I was born to love chances, born for it." She lifted her head and laughed. It amazed Terry to hear the shaken flow of her breath and catch the glinting outline of her face. He found himself leaning forward a little, and he began to wish for a light, though perhaps it was an unconscious wish. "First," she said, "what do you know about Dad and Denver Pete?" "Practically nothing." She was silent for a moment, and he saw her hand go up and prop her chin while she considered what she could say next. "There's so much to tell," she confessed, "that I can't put it short. I'll tell you this much, Black Jack." "That isn't my name, if you please." "It'll be your name if you stay around these parts with Dad very long," she replied, with an odd emphasis. "But where you been raised, Terry, and what you been doing with yourself?" He felt that this giving of the first name was a tribute, in some subtle manner. It enabled him, for instance, to call her Kate, and he decided with a thrill that he would do so at the first opportunity. He reverted to her question. "I suppose," he admitted gloomily, "that I've been raised to do pretty much as I please, and the money I've spent has been given to me." The girl shook her head with conviction. "It ain't possible," she declared. "Why not?" "No son of Black Jack would live off somebody's charity." He felt the blood tingle in his cheeks, and a real anger against her rose. Yet he found himself explaining humbly, "You see, I was taken when I wasn't old enough to decide for myself. I was only a baby, and I was raised to depend upon Elizabeth Cornish. I didn't even know the name of my father until a few days ago." The girl gasped. "You didn't know your father? Not your own father?" She laughed again scornfully. "Terry, I ain't green enough to believe that." He fell into a dignified silence, and presently the girl leaned closer, as though she were peering to make out his face. Indeed, it was now possible to dimly make out objects in the room. The window was filled with an increasing brightness, and presently a shaft of pale light began to slide across the floor, little by little. The moon had pushed up above the crest of the mountain. "Did that make you mad?" queried the girl. "Why?" "You seemed to doubt what I said," he remarked stiffly. "Why not? You ain't under oath or anything, are you?" Then she laughed again. "You're a queer one all the way through. This Elizabeth Cornish got anything to do with the Cornish ranch?" "I presume she owns it very largely." The girl nodded. "You talk like a book. You must have studied a terrible pile." "Not so much, really." Said the girl, and seemed to reserve judgment. Then she asked with a return of her former sharpness, "How come you gambled today at Pedro's?" "I don't know. It seemed the thing to do, to kill time, you know." "Kill time at Pedro's? Well, you are green, Terry." "I suppose I am, Kate." He made a little pause before her name, and when he spoke it, in spite of himself, his voice changed, became softer. The girl straightened somewhat, and the light was now increased to such a point that he could make out that she was frowning at him through the dimness. "First you been adopted, then you been raised on a great big place with everything you want, mostly, and now you're out, playing at Pedro's. How come, Terry?" "I was sent away," said Terry faintly, as all the pain of that farewell came flooding back over him. "Why?" "I shot a man." "Ah," said Kate, "you shot a man." It seemed to silence her. "Why, Terry?" "He killed my father," he explained, more softly than ever. "I know. It was Minter. And they turned you out for that?" There was a trembling intake of her breath. He could catch the sparkle of her eyes, and knew that she had flown into one of her sudden, fiery passions, and it warmed his heart to hear her. "I'd like to know what kind of people they are, anyway. I'd like to meet up with that Elizabeth Cornish, the—" "She's the finest woman that ever breathed," said Terry simply. "You say that," she pondered slowly, "after she sent you away?" "She only did what she thought was right. She's a little hard, but very just, Kate." She was shaking her head. The hair had become a dull and wonderful gold in the faint moonshine. "I don't know what kind of man you are, Terry. I didn't ever know a man could stick by folks after they'd been hurt by 'em. I couldn't do it. I ain't got much Bible stuff in me, Terry. Why, when someone does me wrong, I hate 'em. I hate 'em. And I never forgive 'em till I get back at 'em." She sighed. "But you're different, I guess. I begin to figure that you're pretty white, Terry Hollis." There was something so direct about her talk that he could not answer. It seemed to him that there was in her a cross between a boy and a man, the simplicity of a child and the straightforward strength of a grown man, and all this tempered and made strangely delightful by her own unique personality. "But I guessed it the first time I looked at you," she was murmuring. "I guessed that you was different from the rest." She had her elbow on her knee now, and with her chin cupped in the graceful hand she leaned toward him and studied him. "When they're clean cut on the outside, they're spoiled on the inside. They're crooks, hard ones, out for themselves, never giving a rap about the next gent in line. But mostly they ain't even clean on the outside, and you can see what they are the first time you look at 'em. Oh, I've liked some of the boys now and then, but I had to make myself like 'em. But you're different. I seen that when you started talking. You didn't sulk, and you didn't look proud like you wanted to show us what you could do. You didn't boast none. I kept wondering at you while I was playing at the piano. And you made an awful hit with me, Terry." Again he was too staggered to reply, and before he could gather his wits the girl went on. "Now, is there any real reason why you shouldn't get out of here tomorrow morning?" It was a blow of quite another sort. "But why should I go?" She grew very solemn, with a trace of sadness in her voice. "I'll tell you why, Terry. Because if you stay around here too long, they'll make you what you don't want to be, another Black Jack. Don't you see that? That's why they like you. Because you're his son, and because they want you to be another like him. Not that I have anything against him. I guess he was a fine fellow in his way." She paused and stared directly at him in a way he found hard to bear. He must have been. "But that isn't the sort of a man you want to make out of yourself. I know. You're trying to go straight. Well, Terry, nobody that ever stepped could stay straight long when they had around 'em Denver Pete and my father." She said the last with a sob of grief. He tried to protest, but she waved him away. "I know, and it's true. He'd do anything for me except change himself. Believe me, Terry, you've got to get out of here pronto. Is there anything to hold you here?" "A great deal. $300 I owe your father." She considered him again with that mute shake of the head. Then, "Do you mean it? I see you do. I don't suppose it does any good for me to tell you that he cheated you out of that money." "If I was fool enough to lose it that way, I won't take it back." "I knew that, too. I guessed it. Oh, Terry, I know a pile more about the inside of your head than you'd ever guess. Well, I knew that. And I come with the money so you can pay back Dad in the morning. Here it is. And there's just a mite more to help you on your way." She laid the little handful of gold on the table beside the bed and rose. "Don't go," said Terry, when he could speak. "Don't go, Kate. I'm not that low. I can't take your money." She stood by the bed and stamped lightly. "Are you going to be a fool about this, too?" "Your father offered to give me back all the money I'd won." "I can't do it, Kate." He could see her grow angry, beautifully angry. "Is they no difference between Kate Pollard and Joe Pollard?" Something leaped into his throat. He wanted to tell her in 1,000 ways just how vast that difference was. "Man, you'd make a saint swear, and I ain't a saint by some miles. You take that money and pay Dad and get on your way. This ain't no place for you, Terry Hollis." He began. She broke in. "Don't say it. You'll have me mad in a minute. Don't say it." "I have to. I can't take money from you." "Then take a loan." He shook his head. "Ain't I good enough to even loan you money?" she cried fiercely. The shaft of moonlight had poured past her feet. She stood in a pool of it. "Good enough?" said Terry. "Good enough?" Something that had been accumulating in him now swelled to bursting, flooded from his heart to his throat. He hardly knew his own voice, it was so transformed with sudden emotion. "There's more good in you than in any man or woman I've ever known." "Terry, are you trying to make me feel foolish?" "I mean it, and it's true. You're kinder, more gentle." "Gentle? Me? Oh, Terry!" But she sat down in the bed and she listened to him with her face raised, as though music were falling on her, a thing barely heard at a perilous distance. "They've told you other things, but they don't know. I know, Kate. The moment I saw you I knew, and it stopped my heart for a beat, the knowing of it. That you're beautiful and true as steel. That you're worthy of honor, and that I honor you with all my heart. That I love your kindness, your frankness, your beautiful willingness to help people. Kate, I've lived with a woman who taught me what was true. You've taught me what's glorious and worth living for. Do you understand, Kate?" And no answer, but a change in her face that stopped him. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered at length. "And I shouldn't have let you talk the way you've done. But oh, Terry, when you come to forget what you've said, don't forget it all the way. Keep some of the things tucked away in you somewhere." She rose from the bed and slipped across the white brilliance of the shaft of moonlight. It made a red gold fire of her hair. Then she flickered into the shadow. Then she was swallowed by the darkness. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. There was no Kate at breakfast the next morning. She had left the house at dawn with her horse. "Maybe night before she comes back," said her father. "No telling how far she'll go. Maybe tomorrow before she shows up." It made Terry thoughtful for reasons which he himself did not understand. He had a peculiar desire to climb into the saddle on El Sangre and trail her across the hills, but he was very quickly brought to the reality that if he chose to make himself a laboring man and work out the $300 he would not take back from Joe Pollard, the big man was now disposed to make him live up to his word. He was sent out with an axe and ordered to attack a stout grove of the pines for firewood. But he quickly resigned himself to the work. Whatever gloom he felt disappeared with the first stroke that sunk the edge deep into the soft wood. The next stroke broke out a great chip, and a resinous, fresh smell came up to him. He made quick work of the first tree, working the morning chill out of his body, and as he warmed to his labors, the long muscles of arms and shoulders limbering, the blows fell in a shower. The sturdy pines fell one by one, and he stripped them of branches with long, sweeping blows of the axe, shearing off several at a stroke. He was not an expert axeman, but he knew enough about that cunning craft to make his blows tell, and a continual desire to sing welled up in him. Once, to breathe after the heavy labor, he stepped to the edge of the little grove. The sun was sparkling in the tops of the trees. The valley dropped far away below him. He felt as one who stands on the top of the world. There was a flash and gleam of red. There stood El Sangre in the corral below him. The stallion raised his head and whinnied in reply to the master's whistle. A great sweet peace dropped on the heart of Terry Hollis. Now he felt he was at home. He went back to his work. But in the mid-morning Joe Pollard came to him and grunted at the swath Terry had driven into the heart of the lodgepole pines. "I wanted junk for fire," he protested, "not enough to build a house. But I got a little errand for you in town, Terry. You can give El Sangre a stretching down the road?" "Of course." It gave Terry a little prickling feeling of resentment to be ordered about, but he swallowed the resentment. After all, this was labor of his own choosing, though he could not but wonder a little because Joe Pollard no longer pressed him to take back the money he had lost. And he reverted to the talk of Kate the night before. The $300 was now an anchor holding him to the service of her father, and he remembered, with a touch of dismay, that it might take a year of ordinary wages to save $300, or more than a year. It was impossible to be downhearted long, however. The morning was as fresh as a rose, and the four men came out of the house with Pollard to see El Sangre dancing under the saddle. Terry received the commission for a box of shotgun cartridges and the money to pay for them. "And the change," said Pollard liberally, "don't worry me none. Step around and make yourself at home in town. About coming back, well, when I send a man into town, I figure on him making a day of it. So long, Terry." "Hey," called Slim, "is El Sangre gun shy?" "I suppose so." The stallion quivered with eagerness to be off. "Here's to try him." The gun flashed into Slim's hand and boomed. El Sangre bolted straight into the air and landed on legs of jackrabbit qualities that flung him sideways. The hand and voice of Terry quieted him, while the others stood around grinning with delight at the fun and at the beautiful horsemanship. "But what will he do if you pull a gun yourself?" asked Joe Pollard, showing a sudden concern. "He'll stand for it long enough," said Terry. "Try him." There was a devil in Slim that morning. He snatched up a shining bit of quartz and hurled it straight at El Sangre. There was no warning, just a jerk of the arm, and the stone came flashing. "Try your gun on that." The words were torn off short. The heavy gun had twitched into the hand of Terry, exploded, and the gleaming quartz puffed into a shower of bright particles that danced toward the earth. El Sangre flew into a paroxysm of educated bucking of the most advanced school. The steady voice of Terry Hollis brought him at last to a quivering stop. The rider was stiff in the saddle, his mouth a white, straight line. He shoved his revolver deliberately back into the holster. The four men had drawn together, still muttering with wonder. Luck may have had something to do with the success of that snapshot, but it was such a feat of marksmanship as would be remembered and talked about. "Dugan," said Terry huskily. Slim lunged forward, but he was ill at ease. "Well, kid?" "It seemed to me," said Terry, "that you threw that stone at El Sangre. I hope I'm wrong." "Maybe," growled Slim. He flashed a glance at his companions, not at all eager to push this quarrel forward to a conclusion in spite of his known prowess. He had been a little irritated by the adulation which had been shown to the son of Black Jack the night before. He was still more irritated by the display of fine riding, for horsemanship and clever gunplay were the two main feathers in the cap of Slim Dugan. He had thrown the stone simply to test the qualities of this new member of the gang. The snapshot had stunned him. So he glanced at his companions. If they smiled, it meant that they took the matter lightly, but they were not smiling. They met his glance with expressions of uniform gravity. To torment a nervous horse is something which does not fit with the ways of the men of the mountain desert, even at their roughest. Besides, there was an edgy irritability about Slim Dugan which had more than once won him black looks. They wanted to see him tested now by a foeman who seemed worthy of his mettle. And Slim saw the common desire in his flickering side glance. He turned a cold eye on Terry. "Maybe," he repeated, "but maybe I meant to see what you could do with a gun." "I thought so," said Terry through his teeth. "Steady, boy." El Sangre became a rock for firmness. There was not a quiver in one of his long, racing muscles. It was a fine tribute to the power of the rider. "I thought you might be trying out my gun," repeated Terry. "Are you entirely satisfied?" He leaned a little in the saddle. Slim moistened his lips. It was a hard question to answer. The man in the saddle had become a quivering bundle of nerves. Slim could see the twitching of the lips, and he knew what it meant. Instinctively he fingered one of the broad, bright buttons of his shirt. A man who could hit a glittering thrown stone would undoubtedly be able to hit that stationary button. The thought had elements in it that were decidedly unpleasant, but he had gone too far. He dared not recede now if he wished to hold up his head again among his fellows, and fear of death had never yet controlled the actions of Slim Dugan. "I don't know," he remarked carelessly. "I'm a sort of curious gent. It takes more than one lucky shot to make me see the light." The lips of Terry worked a moment. The companions of Slim Dugan scattered of one accord to either side. There was no doubting the gravity of the crisis which had so suddenly sprung up. As for Joe Pollard, he stood in the doorway in the direct line projected from Terry to Slim and beyond. There was very little sentiment in the body of Joe Pollard. Slim had always been a disturbing factor in the gang. Why not? He bit his lips thoughtfully. "Dugan," said Terry at length, "curiosity is a very fine quality, and I admire a man who has it. Greatly. Now, you may notice that my gun is in the holster again. Suppose you try me again and see how fast I can get it out of the leather and hit a target." The challenge was entirely direct. There was a perceptible tightening in the muscles of the men. They were nerving themselves to hear the crack of a gun at any instant. Slim Dugan, gathering his nerve power, fenced for a moment more of time. His narrowing eyes were centering upon one spot on Terry's body, the spot at which he would attempt to drive his bullet, and he chose the pocket of Terry's shirt. It steadied him, gave him his old self-confidence to have found that target. His hand and his brain grew steady, and the thrill of the fighter's love of battle entered him. "What sort of target do you want?" he asked. "I'm not particular," said Hollis. "Anything will do for me, even a button." It jarred home to Slim, the very thought he had had a moment before. He felt his certainty waver, slip from him. Then the voice of Pollard boomed out at them. "Keep them guns in their houses. You hear me talk? The first man that makes a move I'm going to drill. Slim, get back into the house. Terry, you damn meat eater, get on down that hill." Terry did not move, but Slim Dugan stirred uneasily, turned, and said, "It's up to you, Chief, but I'll see this through sooner or later." And not until then did Terry turn his horse and go down the hill without a backward look. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. There had been a profound reason behind the sudden turning of Terry Hollis's horse and his riding down the hill. For as he sat the saddle, quivering, he felt rising in him an all-controlling impulse that was new to him, a fierce and sudden passion. It was joyous, free, terrible in its force, that wish to slay. The emotion had grown, held back by the very force of a mental thread of reason, until at the very moment when the thread was about to fray and snap, and he would be flung into sudden action, the booming voice of Joe Pollard had cleared his mind as an acid clears a cloudy precipitate. He saw himself for the first time in several moments, and what he saw made him shudder. And still in fear of himself, he swung El Sangre and put him down the slope recklessly. Never in his life had he ridden as he rode in those first 5 minutes down the pitch of the hill. He gave El Sangre his head to pick his own way, and he confined his efforts to urging the great stallion along. The blood bay went like the wind, passing up jutting boulders with a swish of gravel knocked from his plunging hoofs against the rock. Even in Terry's passion of self-dread, he dimly appreciated the prowess of the horse, and when they shot onto the level going of the valley road, he called El Sangre out of the mad gallop and back to the natural pace, a gait as swinging and smooth as running water, yet still the road poured beneath them at the speed of an ordinary gallop. It was music to Terry Hollis, that matchless gait. He leaned and murmured to the pricking ears with that soft, gentle voice which horses love. The glorious head of El Sangre went up a little. His tail flaunted somewhat more proudly. From the quiver of his nostrils to the ringing beat of his black hoofs, he bespoke his confidence that he bore the king of men on his back. And the pride of the great horse brought back some of Terry's own waning self-confidence. His father had been up in him as he faced Slim Dugan, he knew. Once more he had escaped from the commission of a crime, but how long would he succeed in dodging that imp of the perverse which haunted him? It was like the temptation of a drug, to strike just once and thereafter to be raised above himself, to take to himself the power of evil which is greater than the power of good. The blow he struck at the sheriff had merely served to launch him on his way. To strike down was now what he wanted, but to kill? To feel that once he had accomplished the destiny of some strong man, to turn a creature of mind and soul, ambition and hope, at a single stroke into so many pounds of flesh, useless, done for. What could be more glorious? What could be more terrible? And the desire to strike, as he looked into the sneering face of Slim Dugan, had been almost overmastering. Sooner or later he would strike that blow. Sooner or later he would commit the great and controlling crime, and the rest of his life would be a continual evasion of the law. If they would only take him into their midst, the good and the law-abiding men of the mountains, if they would only accept him by word or deed and give him a chance to prove that he was honest. Even then the battle would be hard against temptation, but they were too smugly sure that his downfall was certain. Twice they had rejected him without cause. How long would it be before they actually raised their hands against him? How long would it be before they violently put him in the class of his father? Grinding his teeth, he swore that if that time ever came when they took his destiny into their own hands, he would make it a day to be marked in red all through the mountains. The cool, fresh wind against his face blew the sullen anger away, and when he came close to the town he was his old self. A man on a tall gray, with the legs of speed and plenty of girth at the cinches, where girth means lung power, twisted out of a side trail and swung past El Sangre at a fast gallop. The blood bay snorted and came hard against the bit in a desire to follow. On the range, when he led his wild band, no horse ever passed El Sangre, and hardly the voice of the master could keep him back now. Terry loosed him. He did not break into a gallop, but fled down the road like an arrow, and the gray came back to him slowly and surely until the rider twisted around and swore in surprise. He touched his mount with the spurs. There was a fresh start from the gray, a lunge that kicked a little spurt of dust into the nostrils of El Sangre. He snorted it out. Terry released his head completely, and now, as though in scorn refusing to break into a sweeping gallop, El Sangre flung himself ahead to the full of his natural pace. And the gray came back steadily. The town was showing up at them at the end of the road more and more clearly. The rider of the gray began to curse. He was leaning forward, jockeying his horse, but still El Sangre hurled himself forward powerfully, smoothly. They passed the first shanty on the outskirts of the town, with the red head of the stallion at the hip of the other. Before they straightened into the main street, El Sangre had shoved his nose past the outstretched head of the gray. Then the other rider jerked back on his reins with a resounding oath. Terry imitated. One call to El Sangre brought him back to a gentle amble. "Going to sell this damn skate," declared the stranger, a lean-faced man of middle age, with big, patient, kindly eyes. "If he can't make another horse break out of a pace, he ain't worth keeping. But I'll tell a man that you've got quite a horse there, partner." "Not bad," admitted Terry modestly. "And the gray has pretty good points, it seems to me." They drew the horses back to a walk. "Ought to have. Been breeding for him 15 years, and here I get beat by a horse that don't break out of a pace." He swore again, but less violently and with less disappointment. He was beginning to run his eyes appreciatively over the superb lines of El Sangre. There were horses and horses, and he began to see that this was 1 in 1,000 or more. "What's the strain in that stallion?" he asked. "Mustang," answered Terry. "Mustang? Man, he's close to 16 hands." "Nearer 15.3. Yes, he stands pretty high. Might call him a freak mustang, I guess. He reverts to the old source stock." "I've heard something about that," nodded the other. "Once in a generation they say a mustang turns up somewhere on the range that breeds back to the old Arab, and that red horse is sure one of 'em." They dismounted at the hotel, the common hitching rack for the town, and the elder man held out his hand. "I'm Jack Baldwin." "Terry'll do for me, Mr. Baldwin. Glad to know you." Baldwin considered his companion with a slight narrowing of the eyes. Distinctly this Terry was not the type to be wandering about the country known by his first name alone. There were reasons and reasons why men chose to conceal their family names in the mountains. However, not all of them were bad. He decided to reserve judgment, particularly since he noted a touch of similarity between the high head and the glorious lines of El Sangre and the young pride and strength of Terry himself. There was something reassuringly clean and frank about both horse and rider, and it pleased Baldwin. They made their purchases together in the store. "Where might you be working?" asked Baldwin. "For Joe Pollard." "Him?" There was a lifting of the eyebrows of Jack Baldwin. "What line?" "Cutting wood just now." Baldwin shook his head. "How Pollard uses so much help is more than I can see. He's got a range back of the hills, I know, and some cattle on it, but he's sure a waster of good labor. Take me now. I need a hand right bad to help me with the cows." "I'm more or less under contract with Pollard," said Terry. He added, "You talk as if Pollard might be a queer sort." Baldwin seemed to be disarmed by this frankness. "Ain't you noticed anything queer up there? No? Well, maybe Pollard is all right. He's sort of a newcomer around here. That big house of his ain't more than 4 or 5 years old. But usually a man buys land and cattle around here before he builds 'em a big house. Well, Pollard is an open-handed cuss, I'll say that for him, and maybe they ain't anything in the talk that goes around." What that talk was Terry attempted to discover, but he could not. Jack Baldwin was a cautious gossip. Since they had finished buying, the storekeeper perched on the edge of a selling counter and began to pass the time of day. It began with the usual preliminaries, invariable in the mountains. "What's the news out your way?" "Nothing much to talk about. How's things with you and your family?" "Fair to middlin' and better. Paddy had the croup, and we sat up 2 nights firing up the croup kettle. Now he's better, but he still coughs terrible bad." And so on until all family affairs had been exhausted. This is a formality. One must not rush to the heart of his news, or he will mortally offend the sensitive Westerner. This is the approved method. The storekeeper exemplified it, and having talked about nothing for 10 minutes, quietly remarked that young Larimer was out hunting a scalp, had been drinking most of the morning, and was now about the town boasting of what he intended to do. "And what's more, he's apt to do it." "Larimer is a no-good young skunk," said Baldwin, with deliberate heat. "It's sure a crime when a boy that ain't got enough brains to fill a peanut shell can run over men just because he's spent his life learning how to handle firearms. He'll meet up with his finish one of these days." "Maybe he will and maybe he won't," said the storekeeper, and spat with precision and remarkable power through the window beside him. "That's what they've been saying for the last 2 years. Dawson come right down here to get him, but it was Dawson that was got. And Kennedy was called a good man with a gun, but Larimer beat him to the draw and filled him plumb full of lead." "I know," growled Baldwin. "Kept on shooting after Kennedy was down and had the gun shot out of his hand and was helpless. And yet they call that self-defense." "We can't afford to be too particular about shootings," said the storekeeper. "Speaking personal, I figure that a shooting now and then lets the blood of the youngsters and gives 'em a new start. Kind of like to see it. But who's Larimer after now?" "A wild goose chase, most likely. He says that he's heard that the son of old Black Jack is around these parts, and that he's going to bury the outlaw's son after he salted him away with lead. "Black Jack's son? Is he around town?" The tone sent a chill through Terry. It contained a breathless horror from which there was no appeal. In the eyes of Jack Baldwin, fair-minded man though he was, Black Jack's son was judged and condemned as worthless before his case had been heard. "I don't know," said the storekeeper, "but if Larimer puts one of Black Jack's breed under the ground, I'll call him some use to the town." Jack Baldwin was agreeing fervently when the storekeeper made a violent signal. "There's Larimer now, and he looks all fired up." Terry turned and saw a tall fellow standing in the doorway. He had been prepared for a youth. He saw before him a hardened man of 30 or more, gaunt-faced, bristling with the rough beard of some 5 or 6 days' growth, a thin, cruel, hawk-like face. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A moment later, from the side door, which led from the store into the main body of the hotel, stepped the chunky form of Denver Pete, quick and light of foot as ever. He went straight to the counter and asked for matches, and as the storekeeper, still keeping half an eye upon the formidable figure of Larimer, turned for the matches, Denver spoke softly from the side of his mouth to Terry. Only in the lockstep line of the prison do they learn to talk in this manner, gauging the carrying power of the whisper with nice accuracy. "That bird's after you, crazy with booze in the head, but steady in hand. One of two things. Clear out right now, or else say the word, and I'll stay and help you get rid of him." For the first time in his life, fear swept over Terry, fear of himself compared with which the qualm he had felt after turning from Slim Dugan that morning had been nothing. For the second time in one day he was being tempted, and the certainty came to him that he would kill Larimer. And what made that certainty more sure was the appearance of his nemesis, Denver Pete, in this crisis. As though with a sure scent for evil, Denver had come to be present and watch the launching of Terry into a career of crime. But it was not the public that Terry feared, it was himself. His moral determination was a dam which blocked fierce currents in him that were struggling to get free, and a bullet fired at Larimer would be the thing that burst the dam and let the floodwaters of self-will free. Thereafter, what stood in his path would be crushed and swept aside. He said to Denver, "This is my affair, not yours. Stand away, Denver, and pray for me." A strange request. It shattered even the indomitable self-control of Denver and left him gaping. Larimer, having completed his survey of the dim interior of the store, stalked down upon them. He saw Terry for the first time, paused, and his bloodshot little eyes ran up and down the body of the stranger. He turned to the storekeeper, but still half of his attention was fixed upon Terry. "Bill," he said, "you seen anything of a spavined, long-horned, no-good skunk named Hollis around town today?" And Terry could see him wait, quivering, half in hopes that the stranger would show some anger at this denunciation. "Ain't seen nobody by that name," said Bill mildly. "Maybe you're chasing a wild goose. Who told you there was a gent named Hollis around?" "Black Jack's son," insisted Larimer. "Wild goose chase? Hell! I was told he was around by a gent named—" "These ain't the kind of matches I want," cried Denver Pete, with a strangely loud-voiced wrath. "I don't want painted wood. How can a gent whittle one of these damn matches down to toothpick size? Give me plain wood, will you?" The storekeeper, wondering, made the exchange. Drunken Larimer had roved on, forgetful of his unfinished sentence. For the very purpose of keeping that sentence unfinished, Denver Pete remained on the scene, edging toward the outskirts. Now was to come, in a single moment, both the temptation and test of Terry Hollis. And well Denver knew that if Larrimer fell with a bullet in his body, there would be the end of Terry Hollis in the world and the birth of a new soul, the true son of Black Jack. "It's him that plugged Sheriff Minter," went on Larrimer. "I hear tell how he got the sheriff from behind and plugged him. This town ain't a place for a man-killing hound dog like young Black Jack, and I'm here to let him know it." The torrent of abuse died out in a crackle of curses. Terry Hollis stood as one stunned, yet his hand stayed free of his gun. "Suppose we go on to the hotel and eat?" he asked Jack Baldwin softly. "No use in staying and letting that fellow deafen us with his oaths, is there?" "Better than a circus," declared Baldwin. "Wouldn't miss it. Since old man Harkness died, I ain't heard cursing to match up with Larrimer's. Didn't know that he had that much brains." It seemed that the fates were surely against Terry this day, yet still he determined to dodge the issue. He started toward the door, taking care not to walk hastily enough to draw suspicion on him because of his withdrawal. But to the heated brain of Larrimer all things were suspicious. His long arm darted out as Terry passed him. He jerked the smaller man violently back. "Wait a minute. I don't know you, kid. Maybe you got the information I want." "I'm afraid not." Terry blinked. It seemed to him that if he looked again at that vicious, contracted face, his gun would slip into his hand of its own volition. "Who are you?" "A stranger in these parts," said Terry slowly, and he looked down at the floor. He heard a murmur from the men at the other end of the room. He knew that small, buzzing sound. They were wondering at the calmness with which he took water. "So is Hollis a stranger in these parts," said Larrimer, facing his victim more fully. "What I want to know is about the gent that owns the red horse in front of the store. Ever hear of him?" Terry was silent. By a vast effort he was able to shake his head. It was hard, bitterly hard, but every good influence that had ever come into his life now stood beside him and fought with and for him. Elizabeth Cornish, the long and fictitious line of his Colby ancestors. Kate Pollard, with her clear-seeing eyes. He saw her last of all. When the men were scorning him for the way he had avoided this battle, she at least would understand, and her understanding would be a mercy. "Hollis is somewhere around here," declared Larrimer, drawing back and biting his lip. "I know it damned well. His horse is standing out yonder. I know what'll fetch him. I'll shoot that horse of his, and that'll bring him. If young Black Jack is half the man they say he is, I ain't out to shoot cowards. I want men." He strode to the door. "Don't do it," shouted Bill, the storekeeper. "Shut up," snapped Baldwin. "I know something. Shut up." The fierce, low voice reached the ear of Terry, and he understood that it meant Baldwin had judged him as the whole world judged him. After all, what difference did it make whether he killed or not? He was already damned as a slayer of men by the name of his father before him. Larrimer had turned with a roar. "What do you mean by stopping me, Bill? What in hell do you mean by it?" With the brightness of the door behind him, his bearded face was wolfish. "Nothing," quavered Bill. "This torrent of danger pouring about him. Except that ain't very popular around here, shooting horses, Larrimer." "Damn you and your ideas," said Larrimer. "I'm going to go my own way. I know what's best." He reached the door. His hand went back to the butt of his revolver. And then it snapped in Terry, that last restraint which had been at the breaking point all this time. He felt a warmth run through him, the warmth of strength and the cold of mysterious and evil happiness. "Wait, Larrimer." The big man whirled as though he had heard a gun. There was a ring in the voice of Terry, like the ring down the barrel of a shotgun after it has been cocked. "You again?" barked Larrimer. "Me again, Larrimer. Don't shoot that horse." "Why not?" "For the sake of your soul, my friend."
Boys, ain't this funny? This gent is a sky pilot, maybe." He made a long stride back. "Stop where you are," cried Terry. He stood like a soldier with his heels together, straight, trembling. And Larrimer stopped as though a blow had checked him. "I may be your sky pilot, Larrimer, but listen to sense. Do you really mean you'd shoot that red horse in front of the hotel?" "Ain't you heard me say it?" "Then the Lord pity you, Larrimer." Ordinarily Larrimer's gun would have been out long before. But the change from this man's humility of the moment before, his almost cringing meekness, to his present defiance, was so startling that Larrimer was momentarily at sea. "Damn my eyes," he remarked furiously. "This is funny, this is. Are you preaching at me, kid? What do you mean by that, huh?" "I'll tell you why. Face me squarely, will you? Your head up and your hands ready." In spite of his rage and wonder, Larrimer instinctively obeyed, for the words came snapping out like military commands. "Now I'll tell you, you man-hunting cur. I'm going to send you to hell with your sins on your head. I'm going to kill you, Larrimer." It was so unexpected, so totally startling, that Larrimer blinked, raised his head, and laughed. But the son of Black Jack tore away all thought of laughter. "Larrimer, I'm Terry Hollis. Get your gun." The wide mouth of Larrimer writhed silently from mirth to astonishment, and then sinister rage. And though he was in the shadow against the door, Terry saw the slow gleam in the face of the tall man. Then his hand whipped for the gun. It came cleanly out. There was no flap to his holster, and the sight had been filed away to give more oiled and perfect freedom to the draw. Years of patient practice had taught his muscles to reflex in this one motion with a speed that baffled the eye. Fast as light that draw seemed to those who watched, and the draw of Terry Hollis appeared to hang in mid-air. His hand wavered, then clutched suddenly, and they saw a flash of metal, not the actual motion of drawing the gun, just that gleam of the barrel at his hip, hardly clear of the holster, and then in the dimness of the big room a spurt of flame and the boom of the gun. There was a clangor of metal at the farthest end of the room. Larrimer's gun had rattled on the boards, unfired. He tossed up his great gaunt arms as though he were appealing for help, leaped into the air, and fell heavily with a force that vibrated the floor where Terry stood. There was one heartbeat of silence. Then Terry shoved the gun slowly back into his holster and walked to the body of Larrimer. To these things Bill, the storekeeper, and Jack Baldwin, the rancher, afterward swore. That young Black Jack leaned a little over the corpse, and then straightened and touched the falling hand with the toe of his boot. Then he turned upon them a perfectly calm, unemotional look. "I seem to have been elected to do the scavenger work in this town," he said, "but I'm going to leave it to you gentlemen to take the carrion away. Shorty, I'm going back to the house. Are you ready to ride that way?" When they went to the body of Larrimer afterward, they found a neat, circular splotch of purple exactly placed between the eyes. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The first thing the people in Pollard's big house knew of the return of the two was a voice singing faintly and far off in the stable. They could hear it because the door to the big living room was open, and Kate Pollard, who had been sitting idly at the piano, stood up suddenly and looked around her. It did not interrupt the crap game of the four at one side of the room, where they kneeled in a close circle, but it brought big Pollard himself to the door in time to meet Denver Pete as the latter hurried in. When Denver was excited he talked very nearly as softly as he walked, and his voice tonight was like a contented humming. It worked, was all he said to Pollard as he came through the door. They exchanged silent grips of the hands. Then Kate drew down on them as if a mysterious signal had been passed to them by the subdued entrance of Denver. The four rose at the side of the room. It was Pollard who forced him to talk. What happened? A pretty little party, said Denver. His purring voice was so soft that to hear him the others instantly drew close. Kate Pollard stood suddenly before him. Terry Hollis has done something, she said. Denver, what has he done? Him? Nothing much. To put it in his own words, he just played scavenger for the town, and he done it in a way they won't be forgetting for a good long day. Denver. Well, no need acting up, Kate. Who was it? Ever meet young Larrimer? She shuddered. Yes, a beast of a man. Sure, worse than a beast, maybe. Well, he's carrion now, to use Terry's words again. Wait a minute, cut in big blonde Phil Marvin. Don't spoil the story for Terry. But did he really do for Larrimer? Larrimer was a neat one with a gun. No good otherwise. Did he do for Larrimer? Echoed Denver in his purring voice. Oh, man, did he do for Larrimer. And I ain't spoiling his story. He won't talk about it. Wouldn't open his face about it all the way home. A pretty neat play, boys. Larrimer was looking for a rep, and he wanted to make it on Black Jack's son. Came tearing in. At first Terry tried to sidestep him. Made me weak inside for a minute because I thought he was going to take water. Then he got riled a bit, and then, whang, it was all over. Not a body shot. No, boys, nothing clumsy and amateurish like that, because a man may live to empty his gun at you after he's been shot through the body. This young Hollis, pals, just up and drills Larrimer clean between the eyes. If you'd have measured it off with a ruler, you couldn't have hit exact center any better than he done. Then he walks up and stirs Larrimer with his toe to make sure he was dead. Cool as hell. You lie, cried the girl suddenly. They whirled at her and found her standing and flaming at them. You hear me say it, Kate, said Denver, losing a little of his calm. He wasn't as cool as that. After killing a man, he wasn't. All right, honey. Don't you hear him singing out there in the stable? Does that sound as if he was cut up much? Then you made him a murderer. You, Denver, and you, Dad. Oh, if there's a hell, you're going to travel there for this, both of you. As if we had anything to do with it, exclaimed Denver innocently. Besides, it wasn't murder. It was plain self-defense. Nothing but that. 3 witnesses to swear to it. But my, you should hear the town rave. They thought nobody could beat Larrimer. The girl slipped back into her chair again and sat with her chin in her hands, brooding. It was all impossible. It could not be. Yet there was Denver, telling his story, and far away the clear baritone of Terry Hollis, singing as he cared for El Sangre. She waited to make sure, waited to see his face and hear him speak close at hand. Presently the singing rang out more clearly. He stepped out of the barn. Oh, I'm a friar of orders gray, through hill and valley I take my way. My long bead roll I merrily chant, wherever I wander, no money I want. And as the last word rang through the room, Terry Hollis stood in the doorway, with his saddle and bridle hanging over one strong arm and his gun and gun belt in the other hand. And his voice came cheerily to them in greeting. It was impossible, more impossible than ever. He crossed the room, hung up his saddle, and found her sitting near. What should he say? How would his color change? In what way could he face her with that stain in his soul? And this was what Terry said to her. I'm going to teach El Sangre to let you ride him, Kate. By the Lord, I wish you'd been with us going down the hill this morning. No shame, no downward head, no remorse. And he was subtly and strangely changed. But she could not put the difference into words. But his eye seemed larger and brighter. It was no longer possible for her to look deeply into it, as she had done so easily the night before, and there were other differences. He held his head in a more lordly fashion. About every movement there was a singular ease and precision. He walked with a lighter step and with a cat-like softness almost as odd as that of Denver. His step had been light before, but it was not like this. But through him and about him there was an air of uneasy, alert happiness, as of one who steals a few perfect moments, knowing that there will not be many. A great pity welled in her, and a great anger. It was the anger which she showed. "Terry Hollis, what have you done? You're looking me in the eye. You ought to be hanging your head. You've done murder, murder, murder." She let the three words ring through the room like three blows, cutting the talk to silence. And all save Terry seemed moved. He was laughing down at her, actually laughing, and there was no doubt as to the sincerity of that mirth. His presence drew her and repelled her. She became afraid for the first time in her life. "A little formality with a gun," he said calmly. "A dog got in my way, Kate, a mad dog. I shot the beast to keep it from doing harm." "Ah, Terry, I know everything. I've heard Denver tell it. I know it was a man, Terry." He insisted carelessly. "By the Lord, Kate, only a dog, and a mad dog at that. Perhaps there was a body of a man, but there was the soul of a dog inside the skin. Tut, it isn't worth talking about." She drew away from him. "Terry, God pity you. I pity you," she went on hurriedly and faintly. "But you ain't the same any more, Terry. I'm almost afraid of you." He tried laughingly to stop her, and in a sudden burst of hysterical terror she fled from him. Out of the corner of her eye she saw him come after her, light as a shadow. And the shadow leaped between her and the door. The force of her rush drove her into his arms. In the distance she could hear the others laughing. They understood such a game as this, and enjoyed it with all their hearts. Ah, the fools! He held her lightly, his fingertips under her elbows. For all the delicacy of that touch, she knew that if she attempted to flee, the grip would be iron. He would hold her where she was until he was through talking to her. "Don't you see what I've done?" he was saying rapidly. "You wanted to drive me out last night. You said I didn't fit, that I didn't belong up here. Well, Kate, I started out today to make myself fit to belong to this company of fine fellows." He laughed a little. If it were not real mirth, at least there was a fierce quality of joy in his voice. "You see, I decided that if I went away I'd be lonely. Particularly, I'd be lonely as the devil, Kate, for you." "You've murdered to make yourself one of us?" "Tush, Kate. You exaggerate entirely. Do you know what I've really done? Why, I've wakened. I've come to my senses. After all, there was no other place for me to go. I tried the world of good, ordinary working people. I asked them to let me come in and prove my right to be one of them. They discharged me when I worked honestly on the range. They sent their professional gunmen and bullies after me. And then I reached the limit of my endurance, Kate, and I've struck back. And the mockery of it all is this, that though they have struck me repeatedly and I have endured it, I, having struck back a single time, am barred from among them forever. Let it be so." "Hush, Terry. I'm going to think of ways—" "You couldn't. Last night, yes. Today I'm a man, and I'm free, and freedom is the sweetest thing in the world. There's no place else for me to go. This is my world. You're my queen. I've won my spurs. I'll use them in your service, Kate." "Stop, Terry." "By the Lord, I will, though I'm happy, don't you see? And I'm going to be happier. I'm going to work my way along until I can tell you that I love you, Kate, that you're the daintiest body of fire and beauty and temper and gentleness and wisdom and fun that was ever crowned with the name of a woman. And—" But under the rapid fire of his words there was a touch of hardness, mockery, perhaps. She drew back, and he stepped instantly aside. She went by him through the door with bowed head, and Terry, closing it after her, heard the first sob. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. It was as if a gate which had hitherto been closed against him in the Pollard house were now open. They no longer held back from Terry, but admitted him freely to their councils. But the first person to whom he spoke was Slim Dugan. There was a certain nervousness about Slim this evening, and a certain shame, for he felt that in the morning, to an extent, he had backed down from the quarrel with young Black Jack. The killing of Larrimer now made that reticence of the morning even more pointed than it had been before. With all these things taken into consideration, Slim Dugan was in the mood to fight and die, for he felt that his honor was concerned. A single slighting remark to Terry, a single sneering side glance, would have been a signal for gunplay, and everyone knew it. The moment there was silence, the son of Black Jack went straight to Slim Dugan. "Slim," he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "a fellow isn't himself before noon. I've been thinking over that little trouble we had this morning, and I've made up my mind that if there were any fault, it was mine for taking a joke too seriously. At any rate, if it's agreeable to you, Slim, I'd like to shake hands and call everything square. But if there's going to be any ill will, let's have it out right now." Slim Dugan wrung the hand of Terry without hesitation. "If you put it that way," he said cordially, "I don't mind saying that I was damned wrong to heave that stone at the horse. And I apologize, Terry." And so everything was forgotten. Indeed, where there had been enmity before, there was now friendship, and there was a breath of relief drawn by every member of the gang. The peacemaking tendency of Hollis had more effect on the others than a dozen killings. They already granted that he was formidable. They now saw that he was highly desirable also. Dinner that night was a friendly affair, except that Kate stayed in her room with a headache. Johnny the Chinaman smuggled a tray to her. Oregon Charlie went to the heart of matters with one of his rare speeches. "You hear me talk, Hollis? She's mad because you've stepped off. She'll get over it all right." Oregon Charlie had a right to talk. It was an open secret that he had loved Kate faithfully ever since he joined the gang. But apparently Terry Hollis cared little about the moods of the girl. He was the center of festivities that evening until an interruption from the outside formed a diversion. It came in the form of a hard rider. The mutter of his hoofs swept to the door, and Phil Marvin, having examined the stranger from the shuttered loophole beside the entrance, opened the door to him at once. "It's Sandy," he fired over his shoulder in explanation. A weary-looking fellow came into the room, swinging his hat to knock the dust off it, and loosening the bandana at his throat. The drooping pale mustache explained his name. 2 words were spoken, and no more. "News?" said Pollard. "News," grunted Sandy, and took a place at the table. Terry had noted before that there were always 1 or 2 extra places laid. He had always liked the suggestion of hospitality. But he was rather in doubt about this guest. He ate with marvelous expedition, keeping his lean face close to the table and bolting his food like a hungry dog. Presently he drained his coffee cup, arranged his mustache with painful care, and seemed prepared to talk. "First thing," he said now, and utter silence spread around the table as he began to talk. "First thing is that McGuire is coming. I seen him on the trail, cut to the left, and took the short way. He ought to be loping in almost any minute." Terry saw the others look straight at Pollard. The leader was thoughtful for a moment. "Is he coming with a gang, Sandy?" "Nope, alone." "He was always a nervy cuss. Some day—" He left the sentence unfinished. Denver had risen noiselessly. "I'm going to beat it for my bunk," he announced. "Let me know when the sheriff is gone." "Sit where you are, Denver. McGuire ain't going to lay hands on you." "Sure he ain't," agreed Denver. "But I ain't partial to having guys lay eyes on me, neither. Some of you can go out and beat up trouble. I like to stay put." And he glided out of the room with no more noise than a sliding shadow. He had hardly disappeared when a heavy hand beat at the door. "That's McGuire," announced Pollard. "Let him in, Phil." So saying, he twitched his gun out of the holster, spun the cylinder, and dropped it back. "Don't try nothing till you see me put my hand into my beard, boys. He don't mean much so long as he's come alone." Marvin drew back the door. Terry saw a man with shoulders of martial squareness enter, and there was a touch of the military in his brisk step and the curt nod he sent at Marvin as he passed the latter. He had not taken off his sombrero. It cast a heavy shadow across the upper part of his worn, sad face. "Evening, Sheriff," came from Pollard, and a muttered chorus from the others repeated the greeting. The sheriff cast his glance over them like a schoolteacher about to deliver a lecture. "Evening, boys." "Sit down, McGuire." "I'm only staying a minute. I'll talk standing." It was a declaration of war. "I guess this is the first time I've been up here, Pollard." "The very first, Sheriff." "Well, if I've been kind of neglectful, it ain't that I'm not interested in you all a heap." He brought it out with a faint smile. There was no response to that mirth. "Matter of fact, I've been keeping my eye on you fellows right along. Now, I ain't up here to do no accusing. I'm up here to talk to you man to man. There's been a good many queer things happen. None of 'em in my county, mind you, or I might have done some talking to you before now. But they's been a lot of queer things happen right around in the mountains, and some of 'em has traced back kind of close to Joe Pollard's house as a starting point. I ain't going to go any further. If I'm wrong, there ain't any harm done. If I'm right, you know what I mean. But I tell you this, boys, we're a long-suffering lot around these parts, but they's some things that we don't stand for, and one of 'em that riles us particular much is when a gent that lays out to be a regular hard-working rancher, even if he ain't got much of a ranch to talk about and work about, takes man-killers under their wings. It ain't regular, and it ain't popular around these parts. I guess you know what I mean." Terry expected Pollard to jump to his feet, but there was no such response. The other men stared down at the table, their lips working. Pollard alone met the eye of the sheriff. The sheriff changed the direction of his glance. Instantly it fell on Terry and stayed there. "You're the man I mean. You're Terry Hollis, Black Jack's son." Terry imitated the others and did not reply. "Oh, there ain't any use beating about the bush. You've got Black Jack's blood in you. That's plain. I remember your old man well enough." Terry rose slowly from his chair. "I think I'm not disputing that, Sheriff. As a matter of fact, I'm very proud of my father." "I think you are," said the sheriff gravely. "I think you are damned proud of him. So proud you might even figure on imitating what he done in the old days." "Perhaps," said Terry. The imp of the perverse was up in him now, urging him on. "Step soft, Sheriff," cried Pollard suddenly, as though he sensed a crisis of which the others were unaware. "Terry, keep hold on yourself." The sheriff waved the cautionary advice away. "My nerves are tolerable good, Pollard," he said coldly. "The kid ain't scaring me none. And now hark to me, Black Jack. You've got away with two gents already. Two that's known, I mean. Minter was one, and Larimer was two. Both times it was a square break. But I know your kind like a book. You're going to step over the line pretty damn pronto, and when you do, I'm going to get you, friend, as sure as the sky is blue. You ain't going to do what your dad done before you. I'll tell you why. In the old days the law was a joke, but it's tolerable strong now. You hear me talk. Get out of these parts and stay out. We don't want none of your kind." There was a flinching of the men about the table. They had seen the tigerish suddenness with which Terry's temper could flare. They had received an object lesson that morning, but to their amazement he remained perfectly cool under fire. He sauntered a little closer to the sheriff. "I'll tell you, McGuire," he said gently, "your great mistake is in talking too much. You've had a good deal of success, my friend, so much that your head is turned. You're quite confident that no one will invade your special territory, and you keep your sympathy for neighboring counties. You pity the sheriffs around you. Now listen to me. You've branded me as a criminal in advance, and I'm not going to disappoint you. I'm going to try to live up to your high hopes. And what I do will be done right in your county, my friend. I'm going to make the sheriffs pity you, McGuire. I'm going to make your life a small bit of hell. I'm going to keep you busy. And now get out. And before you judge the next man that crosses your path, wait for the advice of 12 good men and true. You need advice, McGuire. You need it to beat hell. Start on your way." His calmness was shaken a little toward the end of this speech, and his voice at the close rang sharply at McGuire. The latter considered him from beneath frowning brows for a moment, and then, without another word, without a glance to the others and a syllable of adieu, turned and walked slowly, thoughtfully out of the room. Terry walked back to his place. As he sat down, he noticed that every eye was upon him, worried. "I'm sorry that I had to do so much talking," he said, "and I particularly apologize to you, Pollard, but I'm tired of being hounded. As a matter of fact, I'm now going to try to play the part of the hound myself. Action, boys. Action is what we must have, and action right in this county under the nose of the complacent McGuire." End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. There was no exuberant joy to meet this suggestion. McGuire had, as a matter of fact, made his territory practically crime-proof for so long that men had lost interest in planning adventures within the sphere of his authority. It seemed to the 4 men of Pollard's gang a peculiar folly to cast a challenge in the teeth of the formidable sheriff himself. Even Pollard was shaken and looked to Denver. But that worthy, who had returned from the door where he was stationed during the presence of the sheriff, remained in his place smiling down at his hands. He, for one, seemed oddly pleased. In the meantime, Sandy was setting forth his second and particularly interesting news item. "You all know Lewison?" he asked. "The sour old grouch," affirmed Phil Marvin. "Sure, we know him." "I know him too," said Sandy. "I worked for the tenderfoot that he skinned out of the ranch. And then I worked for Lewison. If there's anything good about Lewison, you'd need a spyglass to find it, and then it wouldn't be fit to see. His wife couldn't live with him. He drove his son off and turned him into a drunk, and he lived his life for his coin." "Which he ain't got much to show for it," remarked Marvin. "He lives like a starved dog." "And that's just why he's got the coin," said Sandy. "He lives on what would make a dog sick, and his whole life he's been saving every cent he's made. He gives his wife one dress every 3 years till she died. That's how tight he is. But he's sure got the money. Told everybody his kid run off with all his savings. That's a lie. His kid didn't have the guts or the sense to steal even what was coming to him for the work he had done for the old miser. Matter of fact, he's got enough coin saved, all gold, to break the back of a mule. That's a fact. Never did no investing, but turned everything he made into gold and put it away." "How do you know?" This from Denver. "How does a buzzard smell a dead cow?" said Sandy inelegantly. "I ain't going to tell you how I smell out the facts about money. Wouldn't be of any use to you if you knew the trick. The facts is these. He sold his ranch. You know that." "Sure, we know that." And you know he wouldn't take nothing but gold coin paid down at the house." "That so?" "It sure is. Now the point's this. He's got all his gold in his own private safe at home." Denver groaned. "I know, Denver," nodded Sandy. "Easy pickings for you, but I didn't find all this out till the other day. Never even knew he had a safe in his house. Not till he had 'em bring out a truck from town, and he ships the safe and everything in it to the bank. You see, he sold out his own place, and he's got another that he bought down the river. Well, boys, here's the dodge. That safe of his is in the bank tonight, guarded by old Lewison himself and 2 gunmen he's hired for the job. Tomorrow he starts out down the river with the safe on a big wagon, and he'll have half a dozen guards along with him. Boys, there's going to be $40,000 in that safe. And the minute she gets out of the county, because old McGuire will guard it to the boundary line, we can lay back in the hills and—" "You've done enough planning, Sandy," broke in Joe Pollard. "You smelled out the loot. Leave it to us to get it. Did you say 40,000? And on every face around the table Terry saw the same hunger and the same yellow glint of the eyes. It would be a big haul, one of the biggest, if not the very biggest, Pollard had ever attempted. Of the talk that followed, Terry heard little, because he was paying scant attention. He saw Joe Pollard lie back in his chair with squinted eyes and run over a swift description of the country through which the trail of the money would lead. The leader knew every inch of the mountains, it seemed. His memory was better than a map. In it was jotted down every fallen log, every boulder, it seemed. And when his mind was fixed on the best spot for the hold-up, he sketched his plan briefly. To this man and to that, parts were assigned in brief. There would be more to say in the morning about the details, and every man offered suggestions. On only one point were they agreed. This was a sum of money for which they could well afford to spill blood. For such a prize as this, they could well risk making the countryside so hot for themselves that they would have to leave Pollard's house and establish headquarters elsewhere. 2 shares to Pollard and 1 to each of his men, including Sandy, would make the total loot some $4,000 and more per man. And in the event that someone fell in the attempt, which was more than probable, the share for the rest would be raised to $10,000 for Pollard and $5,000 for each of the rest. Terry saw cold glances pass the rounds, and more than one dwelt upon him. He was the last to join, and if there were to be death in this affair, he would be the least missed of all. A sharp order from Pollard terminated the conference and sent his men to bed, with Pollard setting the example. But Terry lingered behind, and he called back Denver. "There is one point," he said, when they were alone, "that it seems to me the chief has overlooked." "Talk up, kid," grinned Denver Pete. "I seen you was thinking. It sure does me good to hear you talk. What's on your mind? Where was Joe wrong?" "Not wrong, perhaps, but he overlooked this fact. Tonight the safe is guarded by 3 men only. Tomorrow it will be guarded by 6. Denver stared and then blinked. "You mean try the safe right in town, inside the old bank? Son, you don't know the gents in this town. They sleep with a gat under every head and ears that hear a pin drop in the next room, right while they're snoring. They dream about fighting, and they wake up ready to shoot." Terry smiled at this outburst. "How long has it been since there was a raid on McGuire's town?" "Don't know. Don't remember anybody being that foolish." "Then it's been so long that'll give us a chance. It's been so long that the 3 men on guard tonight will be half asleep." "I don't know but you're right. Why didn't you speak up in company? I'll call the chief and—" "Wait," said Terry, laying a hand on the round, hard-muscled shoulder of the yegg. "I have a purpose in waiting. 7 men are too many to take into a town." "Huh?" "2 men might surprise 3, but 7 men are more apt to be surprised." "2 agin 3 ain't such bad odds, pal, but the first gun that pops will have the whole town on our backs." Then we'll have to do it without shooting. You understand, Denver?" Denver scratched his head. Plainly he was uneasy. Plainly, also, he was more and more fascinated by the idea. "You and me to turn the trick alone?" he whispered out of the side of his mouth in a peculiar, confidentially guilty way that was his when he was excited. "Kid, I begin to hear the old Black Jack talk in you. I begin to hear him talk. I knew it would come." End of chapter 33. Chapter 34 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. An hour's ride brought them to the environs of the little town, but it was already nearly the middle of the night, and the village was black. Whatever life waked at that hour had been drawn into the vortex of Pedro's, and Pedro's was a place of silence. Terry and Denver skirted down the back of the town and saw the broad windows of Pedro's, against which passed a moving silhouette now and again, but never a voice floated out to them. Otherwise the town was dead. They rode until they were at the other extremity of the main street. Here, according to Denver, was the bank which had never in its entire history been the scene of an attempted raid. They threw the reins of their horses after drawing almost perilously close. "Because if we get what we want," said Terry, "it will be too heavy to carry far." And Denver agreed, though they had come so close that from the back of the bank it must have been possible to make out the outlines of the horses. The bank itself was a broad, dumpy building with adobe walls, whose corners had been washed and rounded by time to shapelessness. The walls angled in as they rose. The roof was flat. As for the position, it could not have been worse. A dwelling abutted on either side of the bank. The second stories of those dwellings commanded the roof of the bank, and the front and back porches commanded the front and back entrances of the building. The moment they had dismounted, Terry and Denver stood a while motionless. There was no doubt, even before they approached nearer, about the activity and watchfulness of the guards who took care of the new deposit in the bank. Across the back wall of the building drifted a shadowy outline, a guard marching steadily back and forth and keeping sentry watch. "A stiff job, son," muttered Denver. "I told you these birds wouldn't sleep with more'n one eye, and there's a few that got 'em both open." But there was no wavering in Terry. The black stillness of the night, the soundless, slowly moving figure across the wall of the building, the hush, the stars, and the sense of something to be done stimulated him, filled him with a giddy happiness such as he had never known before. Crime? It was no crime to Terry Hollis, but a great and delightful game. Suddenly he regretted the very presence of Denver Pete. He wanted to be alone with this adventure, match his cunning and his strength against whoever guarded the money of old Lewison, the miser. "Stay here," he whispered in the ear of Denver. "Keep quiet. I'm going to slip over there and see what's what. Be patient. It may take a long time." Denver nodded. "Better let me come along in case." "Your job is opening the safe. My job is to get you in it safely and get you away again with the stuff." Denver shrugged his shoulders. It was much in the method of famous old Black Jack himself. There were so many features of similarity between the methods of the boy and his father that it seemed to Denver that the ghost of the former man had stepped into the body of his son. In the meantime, Terry faded into the dark. His plan of approach was perfectly simple. The house to the right of the bank was painted blue. Against that dark background no figure stood out clearly. Instead of creeping close to the ground to get past the guard at the rear of the building, he chose his time when the watcher had turned from the nearest end of his beat and was walking in the opposite direction. The moment that happened, Terry strode forward as lightly and rapidly as possible. Luckily, the ground was quite firm. It had once been planted with grass, and though the grass had died, its roots remained densely enough to form a firm matting, and there was no telltale crunching of the sand underfoot. Even so, some slight sound made the guard pause abruptly in the middle of his walk and whirl toward Terry. Instead of attempting to hide by dropping down to the ground, it came to Terry that the least motion in the dark would serve to make him visible. He simply halted at the same moment that the guard halted, and trusted to the dark background of the house, which was now beside him, to make him invisible. Apparently he was justified. After a moment the guard turned and resumed his pacing, and Terry slipped on into the narrow walk between the bank and the adjoining house on the right. He had hoped for a side window. There was no sign of one. Nothing but the sheer sloping adobe wall, probably of great thickness and burned to the density of soft stone. So he came to the front of the building, and so doing almost ran into a second guard who paced down the front of the bank just as the first kept watch over the rear entrance. Terry flattened himself against the side wall and held his breath, but the guard had seen nothing, and turning again at the end of his beat, went back in the opposite direction. A tall, gaunt man. So much Terry could make out, even in the dark, and his heel fell with heaviness of age. Perhaps this was Lewison himself. The moment he turned, Terry peered around the corner at the front of the building. There were two windows, one close to his corner, and one on the farther side of the door. Both were lighted, but the farther one so dimly that it was apparent the light came from one source, and that source directly behind the window nearest Terry. He ventured one long, stealthy pace and peered into the window. As he had suspected, the interior of the bank was one large room. Half of it was fenced off with steel bars that terminated in spikes at the top, as though, ludicrously, they were meant to keep one from climbing over. Behind the steel fencing were the safes of the bank. Outside the fence, at a table, with a lamp between them, two men were playing cards, and the lamplight glinted on the rusty old safe which stood a little at one side. Certainly old Lewison was guarding his money well. The hopes of Terry disappeared, and as Lewison was now approaching the far end of his beat, Terry glided back into the walk between the buildings and crouched there. He needed time, and thought sadly. As far as he could make out, the only two approaches to the bank, front and rear, were thoroughly guarded. Not only that, but once inside the bank, one would encounter the main obstacle, which consisted of two heavily armed men sitting in readiness at the table. If there were any solution to the problem, it must be found in another examination of the room. Again the tall old man reached the end of his beat nearest Terry, turned with military precision, and went back. Terry slipped out and was instantly at the window again. All was as before. One of the guards had laid down his cards to light a cigarette, and dense clouds of smoke floated above his head. That partial obscurity annoyed Terry. It seemed as if the luck were playing directly against him. However, the smoke began to clear rapidly. When it had mounted almost beyond the strongest inner circle of the lantern light, it rose with a sudden impetus, as though drawn up by an electric fan. Terry wondered at it and squinted toward the ceiling, but the ceiling was lost in shadow. He returned to his harborage between the two buildings for a fresh session of thought, and then his idea came to him. Only one thing could have sucked that straight upward so rapidly, and that was either a fan, which was ridiculous, or else a draft of air passing through an opening in the ceiling. Unquestionably, that was the case. Two windows, small as they were, would never serve adequately to ventilate the big single room of the bank. No doubt there was a skylight in the roof of the building, and another aperture in the floor of the loft. At least, that was the supposition upon which he must act, or else not act at all. He went back as he had come, passed the rear guard easily, and found Denver unmoved, beside the heads of the horses. "Denver," he said, "we've got to get to the roof of that bank, and the only way we can reach it is through the skylight." "Skylight?" echoed Denver. "Didn't know there was one." "There has to be," said Terry with surety. "Can you force a door in one of those houses so we can get to the second story of one of 'em and drop to the roof?" "Force nothing," whispered Denver. "They don't know what locks on doors mean around here." And he was right. They circled in a broad detour and slipped onto the back porch of the blue house. The guard at the rear of the bank was whistling softly as he walked. "Instead of watchdogs, they keep doors with rusty hinges," said Denver, as he turned the knob, and the door gave an inch inward. "And I don't know which is worse. But watch this, Bo." And he began to push the door slowly inward. There was never a slackening or an increase in the speed which his hand traveled. It took him a full 5 minutes to open the door a foot and a half. They slipped inside, but Denver called Terry back as the latter began to feel his way across the kitchen. "Wait till I close this door." "But why?" whispered Terry. "Might make a draft. Might wake up one of these birds. And there you are. That's the one rule of politeness for a burglar, Terry. Close the doors after you." And the door was closed with fully as much caution and slowness as had been used when it was opened. Then Denver took the lead again. He went across the kitchen as though he could see in the dark, and then among the tangle of chairs in the dining room beyond. Terry followed in his wake, taking care to step, as nearly as possible, in the same places. But for all that, Denver continually turned in an agony of anger and whispered curses at the noisy clumsiness of his companion. Yet to Terry it seemed as though both of them were not making a sound. The stairs to the second story presented a difficult climb. Denver showed him how to walk close to the wall, for there the weight of their bodies would act with less leverage on the boards, and there would be far less chance of causing squeaks. Even then, the ascent was not noiseless. The dry air had warped the timber sadly, and there was a continual procession of murmurs underfoot as they stole to the top of the stairs. To Terry, his senses growing superhumanly acute as they entered more and more into the heart of their danger, it seemed that those whispers of the stairs might serve to waken 100 men out of sound sleep. In reality, they were barely audible. In the hall, a fresh danger met them. A lamp hung from the ceiling, the flame turned down for the night, and by that uneasy light Terry made out the face of Denver, white, strained, eager, and the little bright eyes forever glinting back and forth. He passed a side mirror, and his own face was dimly visible. It brought him erect with a squeak of the flooring that made Denver whirl and shake his fist. For what Terry had seen was the same expression that had been on the face of his companion, the same animal alertness, the same hungry eagerness. But the fierce gesture of Denver brought him back to the work at hand. There were 3 rooms on the side of the hall nearest the bank, and every door was closed. Denver tried the nearest door first, and the opening was done with the same caution and slowness which had marked the opening of the back door of the house. He did not even put his head through the opening, but presently the door was closed, and Denver returned. "Two," he whispered. He could have only told by hearing the sounds of 2 breathing. Terry wondered quietly. The man seemed possessed of abnormal senses. It was strange to see that bulky, burly, awkward body become now a sensitive organism, possessed of a dangerous grace in the darkness. The second door was opened in the same manner, then the third, and in the midst of the last operation a man coughed. Instinctively Terry reached for the handle of his gun, but Denver went on gradually, closing the door as if nothing had happened. He came back to Terry. "Every room's got sleepers in it," he said, "and the middle room has got a man who's awake. We'll have to beat it." "We'll stay where we are," said Terry calmly, "for 30 minutes, by guess. That'll give him time to go to sleep. Then we'll get through one of these rooms and drop to the roof of the bank." The yegg cursed softly. "Are you trying to hang me?" he gasped. "Sit down," said Terry. "It's easier to wait that way." And they sat cross-legged on the floor of the hall. Once the springs of a bed creaked as someone turned in it heavily. Once there was a voice. One of the sleepers must have spoken without waking. Those two noises and no more, and yet they remained for what seemed 2 hours to Terry, but what he knew could not be more than 20 minutes. "Now," he said to Denver, "we start. Through one of them rooms and out the windows without waking anybody up?" "You can do it, and I'll do it because I have to. Go on." He heard the teeth of Denver grit, as though the yegg were being driven on into this madcap venture merely by a pride which would not allow him to show less courage, even rash courage, than his companion. The door opened. Denver went inside and was soaked up, a shadow among shadows. Terry followed and stepped instantly into the presence of the sleeper. He could tell it plainly. There was no sound of breathing, though no doubt that was plain to the keen ear of Denver, but it was something more than the sound or the sight. It was like feeling a soul, that impalpable presence in the night, a ghostly and a thrilling thing to Terry Hollis. Now against the window on the farther side of the room he made out the dim outline of Denver's chunky shoulders and shapeless hat. Luckily the window was open till its full height. Presently Terry stood beside Denver, and they looked down. The roof of the bank was only some 4 feet below them, but it was also a full 3 feet in distance from the side of the house. Terry motioned the yegg back and began to slip through the window. It was a long and painful process, for at any moment a button might catch or his gun scrape, and the least whisper would ruin everything. At length he hung from his arms at full length. Glancing down, he faintly saw Lewison turn at the end of his beat. Why did not the fool look up? With that thought he drew up his feet, secured a firm purchase against the side of the house, raised himself by the ledge, and then flung himself out into the air with the united effort of arms and legs. He let himself go loose and relaxed in the air, shot down, and felt the roof take his weight lightly, landing on his toes. He had not only made that leap, but he had landed a full 1.5 feet in from the edge of the roof. Compared with the darkness of the interior of the house, everything on the outside was remarkably light now. He could see Denver at the window shaking his head. Then the professional slipped over the sill with practiced ease, dangled at arm's length, and flung himself out with a quick thrust of his feet against the wall. The result was that while his feet were flung away far enough and to spare, the body of Denver inclined forward. He seemed bound to strike the roof with his feet and then drop head first into the alley below. Terry set his teeth with a groan, but as he did so Denver whirled in the air like a cat. His body straightened, his feet barely secured a toehold on the edge of the roof. The strong arm of Terry jerked him in to safety. For a moment they stood close together, Denver panting. He was saying over and over again, "Never again. I ain't any acrobat, Black Jack." The name came easily on his lips now. Once on the roof, it was simple enough to find what they wanted. There was a broad skylight of dark green glass propped up a foot or more above the level of the rest of the flat roof. Beside it, Terry dropped upon his knees and pushed his head under the glass. All below was pitchy black, but he distinctly caught the odor of Durham tobacco smoke. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. That scent of smoke was a clear proof that there was an open way through the loft to the room of the bank below them. But would the opening be large enough to admit the body of a man? Only exploring could show that. He sat back on the roof and put on the mask which the all-thoughtful Denver had provided him. A door banged somewhere far down the street, loudly. Someone might be making a hurried and disgusted exit from Pedro's. He looked quietly around him. After his immersion in the thick darkness of the house, the outer night seemed clear, and the stars burned low through the thin mountain air. Denver's face was black under the shadow of his hat. "How are you, kid? Shaky?" he whispered. Shaky? It surprised Terry to feel that he had forgotten about fear. He had been wrapped in a happiness keener than anything he had known before. Yet the scheme was far from accomplished. The real danger was hardly beginning. Listening keenly, he could hear the sand crunch underfoot of the watcher who paced in front of the building. One of the card players laughed from the room below, a faint, distant sound. "Don't worry about me," he told Denver, and securing a strong finger-hold on the edge of the ledge, he dropped his full length into the darkness under the skylight. His tiptoes grazed the floor beneath, and letting his fingers slide off their perches, he lowered himself with painful care so that his heels might not jar on the flooring. Then he held his breath, but there was no creaking of the loft floor. That made the adventure more possible. An ill-laid floor would have set up a ruinous screeching as he moved, however, carefully across it. "Now," he whispered up to Denver. The latter instantly slid down, and Terry caught the solid bulk of the man under the armpits and lowered him carefully. "A rotten rat-hole," snarled Denver to his companion in that inimitable, guarded whisper. "How we ever coming back this way in a hurry?" It thrilled Terry to hear that appeal, an indirect surrendering of the leadership to him. Again he led the way, stealing toward a ghost of light that issued upward from the center of the floor. Presently he could look down through it. It was an ample square, a full 3 feet across. Below, and a little more than a pace to the side, was the table of the card players. As nearly as he could measure, through the misleading wisps and drifts of cigarette smoke, the distance to the floor was not more than 10 feet, an easy drop for a man hanging by his fingers. Denver came to his side, silent as a snake. "Listen," whispered Terry, cupping a hand around his lips and leaning close to the ear of Denver so that the least thread of sound would be sufficient. "I'm going to cover those two from this place. When I have them covered, you slip through the opening and drop to the floor. Don't stand still, but soft-foot it over to the wall. Then cover them with your gun while I come down. The idea is this. Outside the window there's a second guard walking up and down. He can look through and see the table where they're playing, but he can't see the safe against the wall. As long as he sees those two sitting there playing their cards, he'll be sure that everything is all right. Well, Denver, he's going to keep on seeing them sitting at their game, but in the meantime you're going to make your preparations for blowing the safe. Can you do it? Is your nerve up to it?" Even the indomitable Denver paused before answering. The chances of success in this novel game were about 1 in 10. Only shame to be outbraved by his younger companion and pupil made him nod and mutter his assent. That mutter, strangely, was loud enough to reach the room below. Terry saw one of the men look sharply up, and at the same moment he pulled his gun and shoved it far enough through the gap for the light to catch on its barrel. "Sit tight," he ordered them in a cutting whisper. "Not a move, my friends." There was a convulsive movement toward a gun on the part of the first man, but the gesture was frozen midway. The second man looked up, gaping, ludicrous in astonishment. But Terry was in no mood to see the ridiculous. "Look down again," he ordered brusquely. "Keep on with that game. And the moment one of you goes for a gun, the minute one of you makes a sign or a sound to reach the man in front of the house, I'll drill you both. Is that clear?" The neck of the man who was nearest to him swelled, as though he were lifting a great weight with his head. No doubt he was battling with shrewd temptations to spring to one side and drive a bullet at the robbers above him. But prudence conquered. He began to deal, laying out the cards with mechanical, stiff motions. "Now," said Terry to Denver. Denver was through the opening in a flash and dropped to the floor below with a thud. Then he leaped away toward the wall out of sight of Terry. Suddenly a loud, nasal voice spoke through one of the front windows. "What was that, boys?" Terry caught his breath. He dared not whisper advice to those men at the table, for fear his voice might carry to the guard who was apparently leaning at the window outside. But the dealer jerked his head for an instant toward the direction in which Denver had disappeared. Evidently the yegg was silently communicating imperious instructions, for presently the dealer said in a voice natural enough, "Nothing happened, Lewison. I just moved my chair, that was all, I figure." "I don't know," growled Lewison. "I've been waiting for something to happen for so long that I begin to hear things and suspect things when there ain't nothing at all." And still mumbling, his voice passed away. Terry followed Denver's example, dropping through the opening, but more cautious. He relaxed his leg muscles so that he landed in a bunched heap without sound, and instantly joined Denver on the farther side of the room. Lewison's gaunt outline swept past the window at the same moment. He found that he had estimated viewpoints accurately enough. From only the right-hand window could Lewison see into the interior of the room and make out his two guards at the table. And it was only by actually leaning through the window that he would be able to see the safe beside which Terry and Denver stood. "Start," said Terry, and Denver deftly laid out a little kit and two small packages. With incredible speed he began to make his molding of soft soap around the crack of the safe door. Terry turned his back on his companion and gave his undivided attention to the two at the table. Their faces were odd studies in suppressed shame and rage. The muscles were taut, their hands shook with the cards. "You seem kind of glum, boys," broke in the voice of Lewison at the window. Terry flattened himself against the wall and jerked up his gun. A warning flash which seemed to be reflected by the glint in the eyes of the red-headed man facing him. The latter turned slowly to the window. "Oh, we're all right," he drawled. "Kind of getting wearying, this watch." "Mind you," cracked the uncertain voice of Lewison, $5 if you keep on the job till morning. No, $6, boys." He brought out the last words in the ringing voice of one making a generous sacrifice, and Terry smiled behind his mask. Lewison passed on again. Forcing all his nerve power into the faculty of listening, Terry could tell by the crunching of the sand how the owner of the safe went far from the window and turned again toward it. "Start talking," he commanded softly of the men at the table. "About what?" answered the red-haired man through his teeth. "About what, damn you?" "Tell a joke," ordered Terry. The others scowled down at his hand of cards, and then obeyed. "Ever hear about how Rooney—" The voice was hard at the beginning. Then, in spite of the leveled gun which covered him, the red-haired man became absorbed in the interest of the tale. He began to labor to win a smile from his companion. That would be something worth while, something to tell about afterward, how he made Pat laugh while a pair of bandits stood in a corner with guns on them. In his heart, Terry admired the red-haired man's nerve. The next time Lewison passed the window, he darted out and swiftly went the rounds of the table, relieving each man of his weapon. He returned to his place. Pat had broken into a hearty laughter. "That's it," cried Lewison, passing the window again. "Laughing keeps a gent awake. That's the stuff, Red." A time of silence came, with only the faint noises of Denver at his rapid work. "Suppose they was to rush the bank even," said Lewison on his next trip past the window. "Who's they?" asked Red, and looked steadily into the mouth of Terry's gun. "Why, them that wants my money that I slaved and worked for all my life. Oh, I know they's a lot of crooked thieves that would like to lay hands on it. But I'm going to fool 'em, Red. Never lost a cent of money in all my born days, and I ain't going to form the habit this late in life. I've got too much to live for." And he went on his way, muttering. "Ready?" said Denver. "Red," whispered Terry. "How's the money put into the safe?" The big red-haired fellow fought him silently with his eyes. "I don't know." "Red," said Terry swiftly, "you and your friends are dead weight on us just now, and there's one quick, convenient way of getting rid of you. Talk out, my friend. Tell us how that money is stowed." Red flushed, the veins in the center of his forehead swelling under a rush of blood to the head. He was silent. It was Pat who weakened, shuddering. "Stowed in canvas sacks, boys, and some paper money." The news of the greenbacks was welcome, for a large sum of gold would be an elephant's burden to them in their flight. "Wait," Terry directed Denver. The latter kneeled by his fuse until Lewison passed far down the end of his beat. Terry stepped to the door and dropped the bolt. "Now," he commanded. He had planned his work carefully. The loose strips of cords which Denver had put into his pocket, nothing so handy as strong twine, he had said, were already drawn out, and the minute he had given the signal, he sprang for the men at the table, backed them into a corner, and tied their hands behind their backs. The fuse was sputtering. "Put out the light," whispered Denver. It was done, and a leap and a puff of breath, and then Terry joined the huddled group of men at the farther end of the room. "Hey," called Lewison, "what happened to the light? What the hell?" His voice boomed out loudly at them as he thrust his head through the window into the darkness. He caught sight of the red, flickering end of the fuse. His voice, grown shrill and sharp, was chopped off by the explosion. It was a noise such as Terry had never heard before, like a tremendously condensed and powerful puff of wind. There was not a sharp jar, but he felt an invisible pressure against his body, taking his breath. The sound of the explosion was dull, muffled, thick. The door of the safe crushed into the flooring. Terry had nerved himself for 2 points of attack, Lewison from the front of the building and the guard at the rear. But Lewison did not yell for help. He had been dangerously close to the explosion, and the shock to his nerves, perhaps some dislodged missile, had flung him senseless on the sand outside the bank. But from the rear of the building came a dull shout. Then the door beside which Terry stood was dragged open. He struck with all his weight, driving his fist fairly into the face of the man, and feeling the knuckles cut through flesh and lodge against the cheekbone. The guard went down in the middle of a cry and did not stir. Terry leaned to shake his arm. The man was thoroughly stunned. He paused only to scoop up the fallen revolver which the fellow had been carrying and fling it into the night. Then he turned back into the dark bank, with Red and Pat cursing in frightened unison as they cowered against the wall behind him. The air was thick with an ill-smelling smoke like that of a partially snuffed candle. Then he saw a circle of light spring out from the electric lantern of Denver and fall on the partially wrecked safe, and it glinted on yellow. One of the sacks had been slit, and contents were running out onto the floor like golden water. Over it stooped the shadow of Denver, and Terry was instantly beside him. They were limp little sacks, marvelously ponderous, and the chill of the metal struck through the canvas to the hand. The searchlight flickered here and there. It found the little drawer which was wrenched open, and Denver's stubby hand came out, choked with greenbacks. "Now away," snarled Denver, and his voice shook and quaked. It reminded Terry of the whine of a dog half starved and come upon meat, a savage, subdued sound. There was another sound from the streets where old Lewison was coming to his senses. A gasping sound, and then a choked cry, "Help!" His senses and his voice seemed to return to him with a rush. His shriek split through the darkness of the room like a ray of light probing to find the guilty. "Thieves! Help!" The yell gave strength to Terry. He caught some of the burden that was staggering Denver into his own arms and floundered through the rear door into the blessed openness of the night. His left arm carried the crushing burden of the canvas sacks, in his right hand was the gun, but no form showed behind him. But there were voices beginning. The yells of Lewison had struck out echoes up and down the street. Terry could hear shouts begin inside houses in answer, and barked out with sudden clearness as a door or a window was opened. They reached the horses, dumped the precious burdens into the saddlebags, and mounted. "Which way?" gasped Denver. A light flickered in the bank. Half a dozen men spilled out of the back door, cursing and shouting. "Walk your horse," said Terry. "Walk it, you fool." Denver had let his horse break into a trot. He drew it back to a walk at this hushed command. "They won't see us unless we start at a hard gallop," continued Terry. "They won't watch for slowly moving objects now. Besides, it'll be 10 minutes before the sheriff has a posse organized, and that's the only thing we have to fear." End of chapter 35. Chapter 36 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. They drifted past the town, quickening to a soft trot after a moment, and then to a faster trot. El Sangre was gliding along at a steady pace. "Not back to the house," said Denver with an oath, when they straightened back to the house of Pollard. "That's the first place McGuire will look, after what you said to him the other night." "That's where I want him to look," answered Terry, "and that's where he'll find me. Pollard will hide the coin, and we'll get one of the boys to take our sweaty horses over the hill. We can tell McGuire that the 2 horses have been put out to pasture, if he asks, but he mustn't find hot horses in the stable. Certainly McGuire will strike for the house, but what will he find?" He laughed joyously. Suddenly the voice of Denver cut in softly, insinuatingly. "You dope it that he'll cut for the house of Pollard? So do I. Now, kid, why not go another direction and keep on going? What right have Pollard and the others to cut in on this coin? You and me, kid, can—" "I don't hear you, Denver," interrupted Terry. "I don't hear you. We wouldn't have known where to find the stuff if it hadn't been for Pollard's friend Sandy. They get their share, but you can have my part, Denver. I'm not doing this for money. It's only an object lesson to that fat-headed sheriff. I'd pay twice this price for the sake of the little talk I'm going to have with him later on tonight." "All right, Black Jack," muttered Denver, for it seemed to him that the voice of the lost leader had spoken. "Play the fool then, kid, but let's feed these skates the spur. The town's boiling." Indeed, there was a dull roar behind them. "No danger," chuckled Terry. "McGuire knows perfectly well that I've done this. And because he knows that, and he knows that I know it, he'll strike in the opposite direction to Pollard's house. He'll never dream that I would go right back to Pollard and sit down under the famous nose of McGuire." The dawn was brightening over the mountains above them, and the skyline was ragged with forest. A free country for free men, like the old Black Jack and the new. A short life, perhaps, but a full one. The coming of the day showed Denver's face weary and drawn. Those moments in the bank, surrounded by danger, had been nerve-racking even to his experience. But to him it was a business, and to Terry it was a game. He felt a qualm of pity for Lewison, but after all the man was a wolf, selfish, accumulating money to no purpose, useless to the world. He shrugged the thought of Lewison away. It was close to sunrise when they reached the house, and having put up the horses, staggered in and called to Johnny to bring them coffee. He was already rattling at the kitchen stove. Then, with a shout, they brought Pollard himself stumbling down from the balcony, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. They threw the money down before him. He was stupefied, and then his big lion's voice went booming with the call for his men. Terry did not wait. He stretched himself with a great yawn and made for his bed, and passed Phil Marvin and the others hurrying downstairs to answer the summons. Kate Pollard came also. She paused as he went by her, and he saw her eyes go down to his dusty boots, with the leather polished where the stirrup had chafed, then flashed back to his face. "You, Terry?" she whispered. But he went by her with a wave of the hand. The girl went on down to the big room. They were gathered already, a bright-eyed, hungry-faced crew of men. Gold was piled across the table in front of them. Slim Dugan had been ordered to go to the highest window of the house and keep watch for the coming of the expected posse. In the meantime, the others counted the money, ranging it in bright little stacks, and Denver told the tale. He took a little more credit to himself than was his due, but it was his part to pay a tribute to Terry, for was it not he who had brought the son of Black Jack among them? "And of all the close squeezes I've ever been in," concluded Denver, "that was the closest. And of all the nervy, cold-eyed guys I ever seen, Black Jack's kid takes the cake. Never a quiver all the time. And when he whispered, them two guys at the table jumped. He meant business, and they knew it." The girl listened. Her eye alone was not upon the money, but fixed far off at thin distance. 35,000 gold, announced Pollard, with a break of excitement in his voice, and 17,382 in paper. Boys, the richest haul we've ever made. And the coolest deal all the way through, which I say Denver and Terry particular, gets extra shares for what they done. And there was a chorus of hearty approval. The voice of Denver cut it short. "Terry don't want none. No, boys, knock me dead if he does. Can you beat it? I did it to keep my word," he says, "with the sheriff. You can have my share, Denver." And he sticks on it. It's a game with him, boys. He plays at it like a big kid. In the hush of astonishment the eyes of Kate misted. Something in that last speech had stung her cruelly. Something had to be done, and quickly, to save young Terry Hollis. But what power could influence him? It was that thought which brought her to the hope for a solution, a very vague and far-away hope to which she clung, and which unraveled slowly in her imagination. Before she left the kitchen her plan was made, and immediately after breakfast she went to her room and dressed for a long journey. "I'm going over the hills to visit the Stockton girls," she told her father. "Be gone a few days." His mind was too filled with hope for the future to understand her. He nodded idly, and she was gone. She roped the toughest mustang of her string in the corral, and 10 minutes later she was jogging down the trail. Halfway down, a confused group of riders, some dozen in all, swarmed up out of the lower trail. Sheriff McGuire rode out on a sweating horse that told of fierce and long riding, and stopped her. His salutation was brief. He plunged into the heart of his questions. Had she noticed anything unusual this morning? Which of the men had been absent from the house last night? Particularly, who went out with Black Jack's kid? "Nobody left the house," she said steadily. "Not a soul." And she kept a blank eye on the sheriff while he bit his lip and studied her. "Kate," he said at length, "I don't blame you for not talking. I don't suppose I would in your place. But your dad has about reached the end of the rope with us. If you've got any influence, try to change him, because if he don't do it by his own will, he's going to be changed by force." And he rode on up the trail, followed by the silent string of riders on their grunting, tired horses. She gave them only a careless glance. Joe Pollard had baffled officers of the law before, and he would do it again. That was not her great concern on this day. Down the trail she sent her mustang again, and broke him out into a stiff gallop on the level ground below. She headed straight through the town, and found a large group collected in and around the bank building. They turned and looked after her, but no one spoke a greeting. Plainly, the sheriff's suspicions were shared by others. She shook that shadow out of her head and devoted her entire attention to the trail, which roughened and grew narrow on the other side of the town. Far away across the mountains lay her goal, the Cornish ranch. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. When she first glimpsed Bear Valley from the summits of the Blue Mountains, it seemed to her a small paradise, and as she rode lower and lower among the hills, the impression gathered strength. So she came out onto the road and trotted her cowpony slowly under the beautiful branches of the silver spruce, and saw the bright tree shadows reflected in Bear Creek. Surely here was a place of infinite quiet, made for happiness. A peculiar ache and a sense of emptiness entered her heart, and the ghost of Terry Hollis galloped soundlessly beside her on flaming El Sangre through the shadow. It seemed to her that she could understand him more easily. His had been a sheltered and pleasant life here, half dreamy, and when he wakened into the world of stern reality and stern men, he was still playing at the game like a boy, as Denver Pete had said. She came out into view of the house, and again she paused. It was like a palace to Kate, that great white facade and the Doric columns of the veranda. She had always thought that the house of her father was a big and stable house. Compared with this, it was a shack, a lean-to, a veritable hovel. And the confidence which had been hers during the hard ride of 2 days across the mountains grew weaker. How could she talk to the woman who owned such an establishment as this? How could she ever gain access to her? On a broad level terrace below the house, men were busy with plows and scrapers, smoothing the ground. She circled around them and brought her horse to a stop before the veranda. 2 men sat on it, one white-haired, hawk-faced, spreading a broad blueprint before the other, and this man was middle-aged, with a sleek young face, a very good-looking fellow, she thought. "Maybe you all could tell me," said Kate Pollard, lounging in the saddle, "where I'll find the lady that owns this here place." It seemed to her that the sleek-faced man flushed a little. "If you wish to talk to the owner," he said crisply, and barely touching his hat to her, "I'll do your business. What is it? Cattle lost over the Blue Mountain again? No strays have come down into the valley." "I'm not here about cattle," she answered curtly enough. "I'm here about a man." Said the other. "A man?" His attention quickened. "What man?" "Terry Hollis." She could see him start. She could also see that he endeavored to conceal it, and she did not know whether she liked or disliked that quick start and flush. There was something either of guilt or of surprise remarkably strong in it. He rose from his chair, leaving the blueprint fluttering in the hands of his companion alone. "I am Vance Cornish," he told her. She could feel his eyes prying at her, as though he were trying to get at her more accurately. "What's Hollis been up to now?" He turned and explained carelessly to his companion. "That's the young scapegrace I told you about. Waters been raising Cain again, I suppose." He faced the girl again. "A good deal of it," she answered. "Yes, he's been making quite a bit of trouble." "I'm sorry for that, really," said Vance, "but we are not responsible for him." "I suppose you ain't," said Kate Pollard slowly, "but I'd like to talk to the lady of the house." "Very sorry, And again he looked in his sharp way, like a fox, she thought, and then glanced away as though there were no interest in her or her topic. "Very sorry, but my sister is in critically declining health. I'm afraid she cannot see you." This repulse made Kate thoughtful. She was not used to such bluff talk from men, however smooth or rough the exterior might be, and under the quiet of Vance she sensed an opposition like a stone wall. "I guess you ain't a friend of Terry's." "I'd hardly like to put it strongly, one way or the other. I know the boy, if that's what you mean." "It ain't." She considered him again, and again she was secretly pleased to see him stir under the cool probe of her eyes. "How long did you live with Terry?" "He was with us 24 years." He turned and explained casually to Walters. "He was taken in as a foundling, you know, quite against my advice. And then at the end of 24 years the bad blood of his father came out, and he showed himself in his true colors. Fearful waste of time to us all. Of course, we had to turn him out." "Of course," nodded Waters sympathetically, and he looked wistfully down at his blueprint. 24 years you lived with Terry," said the girl softly. "And you don't like him, I see." Instantly and forever he was damned in her eyes. Anyone who could live 24 years with Terry Hollis and not discover his fineness was beneath contempt. "I'll tell you," she said. "I've got to see Miss Elizabeth Cornish." Said Vance. "I'm afraid not. But just what have you to tell her?" The girl smiled. "If I could tell you that, I wouldn't have to see her." He rubbed his chin with his knuckles, staring at the floor of the veranda, and now and then raising quick glances at her. Plainly he was suspicious. Plainly, also, he was tempted in some manner. "Something he's done, huh? Some yarn about Terry?" It was quite plain that this man actually wanted her to have something unpleasant to say about Terry. Instantly she suited herself to his mood, for he was the door through which she must pass to see Elizabeth Cornish. "Bad," she said, hardening her expression as much as possible. "Well, bad enough. A killing to begin with." There was a gleam in his eye, a gleam of positive joy, she was sure, though he banished it at once and shook his head in deprecation. "Well, well, as bad as that. I suppose you may see my sister for a moment, just a moment. She is not well. I wish I could understand your purpose." The last was more to himself than to her, but she was already off her horse. The man with the blueprint glared at her, and she passed across the veranda and into the house, where Vance showed her up the big stairs. At the door of his sister's room he paused again and scrutinized. "A killing, by Jove," he murmured to himself, and then knocked. A dull voice called from within, and he opened. Kate found herself in a big, solemn room, in one corner of which sat an old woman wrapped to the chin in a shawl. The face was thin and bleak, and the eyes that looked at Kate were dull. "This girl," said Vance. "By Jove, I haven't asked your name, I'm afraid." "Kate Pollard." "Miss Pollard has some news of Terry. I thought it might interest you, Elizabeth." Kate saw the brief struggle on the face of the old woman. When it passed, her eyes were as dull as ever, but her voice had become husky. "I'm surprised, Vance. I thought you understood. His name is not to be spoken, if you please." "Of course not. Yet I thought never mind. If you'll step downstairs with me, Miss Pollard, and tell me what—" "Not a step," answered the girl firmly, and she had not moved her eyes from the face of the elder woman. "Not a step with you. What I have to say has got to be told to someone who loves Terry Hollis. I've found that someone. I'll stick here till I've done talking." Vance Cornish gasped, but Elizabeth opened her eyes, and they brightened, but coldly, it seemed to Kate. "I think I understand," said Elizabeth Cornish gravely. "He has entangled the interests of this poor girl and sent her to plead for him. Is that so? If it's money he wants, let her have what she asks for, Vance, but I can't talk to her of the boy." "Very well," said Vance without enthusiasm. He stepped before her. "Will you step this way, Miss Pollard?" "Not a step," she repeated, and deliberately sat down in a chair. "You'd better leave," she told Vance. He considered her in open anger. "If you've come to make a scene, I'll have to let you know that on account of my sister I cannot endure it." "Really? I'm going to stay here," she echoed, "until I've done talking. I've found the right person. I know that. Tell you what I want? Why, you hate Terry Hollis." "Hate him?" murmured Elizabeth. "Nonsense!" cried Vance. "Look at his face, Miss Cornish," said the girl. "Vance, by everything that's sacred, your eyes were positively shrinking. Do you hate him?" "My dear Elizabeth, if this unknown—" "You'd better leave," interrupted the girl. "Miss Cornish is going to hear me talk." Before he could answer, his sister said calmly, "I think I shall, Vance. I begin to be intrigued." "In the first place," he blurted angrily, "it's something you shouldn't hear. Some talk about a murder." Elizabeth sank back in her chair and closed her eyes. "Ah, coward!" cried Kate Pollard, now on her feet. "Vance, will you leave me for a moment?" For a moment he was white with malice, staring at the girl, then suddenly submitting to the inevitable, turned on his heel and left the room. "Now," said Elizabeth, sitting erect again, "what is it? Why do you insist on talking to me of him? And what has he done?" In spite of her calm, a quiver of emotion was behind the last words, and nothing of it escaped Kate Pollard. "I knew," she said gently, "that two people couldn't live with Terry for 24 years and both hate him, as your brother does. I can tell you very quickly why I'm here, Miss Cornish." "But first, what has he done?" Kate hesitated. Under the iron self-control of the older woman she saw the hungry heart, and it stirred her. Yet she was by no means sure of a triumph. She recognized the most formidable of all foes, pride. After all, she wanted to humble that pride. She felt that all the danger in which Terry Hollis now stood, both moral and physical, was indirectly the result of this woman's attitude. And she struck her, deliberately, cruelly. "He has taken up with a gang of hard ones, Miss Cornish. That's one thing." The face of Elizabeth was like stone. "Professional thieves, robbers." And still Elizabeth refused to wince. She forced a cold, polite smile of attention. "He went into a town and killed the best fighter they had. And even this blow did not tell. And then he defied the sheriff, went back to the town, and broke into a bank and stole $50,000. The smile wavered and went out, but still the dull eyes of Elizabeth were steady enough, though perhaps that dullness was from pain. And Kate, waiting eagerly, was chagrined to see that she had not broken through to any softness of emotion. One sign of grief and trembling was all she wanted before she made her appeal. But there was no weakness in Elizabeth Cornish, it seemed. "You see, I'm listening," she said gravely, and almost gently, "although I am really not well, and I hardly see the point of this long recital of crimes. It was because I foresaw what he would become that I sent him away." "Miss Cornish, why'd you take him in the first place?" "It's a long story," said Elizabeth. "I'm a pretty good listener," said Kate. Elizabeth Cornish looked away, as though she hesitated to touch on the subject, or thought it was too unimportant to be referred to at length. "In brief, I saw from a hotel window Black Jack, his father, shot down in the street, heard about the infant son he left, and adopted the child on a bet with my brother, to see if blood would tell or if I could make him a fine man." She paused. "My brother won the bet." And her smile was a wonderful thing, so perfectly did it mask her pain. And of course I sent Terry away. I have forgotten him, really. Just a bad experiment." Kate Pollard flushed. "You'll never forget him," she said firmly. "You think of him every day." The elder woman started and looked sharply at her visitor. Then she dismissed the idea with a shrug. "That's absurd. Why should I think of him?" There is a spirit of prophecy in most women, old or young, and especially they have a way of looking through the flesh of their kind and seeing the heart. Kate Pollard came a little closer to her hostess. "You saw Black Jack die in the street?" she queried. "Fighting for his life?" Elizabeth dreamed into the vague distance. "Riding down the street with his hair blowing, long black hair, you know," she reminisced, "and holding the crowd back as one would hold back a crowd of curs. Then he was shot from the side by a man in concealment. That was how he fell." "I knew," murmured the girl, nodding. "Miss Cornish, I know now why you took Terry in." "Ah?" "Not because of a bet, but because you loved Black Jack Hollis." It brought an indrawn gasp from Elizabeth, rather of horror than surprise. But the girl went on steadily. "I know. You saw him with his hair blowing, fighting his way. He rode into your heart. I know, I tell you. Maybe you've never guessed it all these years, but has a single day gone by when you haven't thought of the picture?" The scornful, indignant denial died on the lips of Elizabeth Cornish. She stared at Kate as though she were seeing a ghost. "Not one day!" cried Kate. "And so you took in Terry, and you raised him and loved him, not for a bet, but because he was Black Jack's son." Elizabeth Cornish had grown paler than before. "I mustn't listen to such talk," she said. "Ah," cried the girl, "don't you see that I have a right to talk? Because I love him also, and I know that you love him too." Elizabeth Cornish came to her feet, and there was a faint flush in her cheeks. "You love Terry? Ah, I see. And he has sent you?" "He'd die sooner than send me to you." "And yet you came?" "Don't you see?" pleaded Kate. "He's in a corner. He's about to go bad." "Miss Pollard, how do you know these things?" "Because I'm the daughter of the leader of the gang." She said it without shame, proudly. "I've tried to keep him from the life he intends leading," said Kate. "I can't turn him. He laughs at me. I'm nothing to him, you see. And he loves the new life. He loves the freedom. Besides, he thinks there's no hope, that he has to be what his father was before him. Do you know why he thinks that? Because you turned him out. You thought he would turn bad, and he respects you. He still turns to you. Ah, if you could hear him speak of you! He loves you still." Elizabeth Cornish dropped back into her chair, grown suddenly weak, and Kate fell on her knees beside her. "Don't you see," she said softly, "that no strength can turn Terry back now? He's done nothing wrong. He shot down the man who killed his father. He has killed another man who was a professional bully and man killer. And he's broken into a bank and taken money from a man who deserved to lose it, a wolf of a man everybody hates. He's done nothing really wrong yet, but he will before long, just because he's stronger than other men, and he doesn't know his strength. And he's fine, Miss Cornish. Isn't he always gentle and—" "Hush," said Elizabeth Cornish. "He's just a boy. You can't bend him with strength, but you can win him with love." "What?" gasped Elizabeth. "Do you want me to do?" "Bring him back. Bring him back, Miss Cornish." Elizabeth Cornish was trembling. "But if you can't influence him, how can I? You with your beautiful. You are very beautiful, dear child. Ah, very lovely." She barely touched the bright hair. "He doesn't even think of me," said the girl sadly. "But I have no shame. I have let you know everything. It isn't for me. It's for Terry, Miss Cornish. And you'll come? You'll come as quickly as you can. You'll come to my father's house. You'll ask Terry to come back. One word would do it, and I'll hurry back and keep him there till you come. God give me strength, I'll keep him till you come." Outside the door, his ear pressed to the crack, Vance Cornish did not wait to hear more. He knew the answer of Elizabeth before she spoke, and all his high-built schemes he saw topple about his ears. Grief had been breaking the heart of his sister, he knew. Grief had been bringing her close to the grave. With Terry back, she would regain 10 years of life. With Terry back, the old life would begin again. He straightened and staggered down the stairs like a drunken man, clinging to the banister. It was an old-faced man who came out onto the veranda where Waters was chewing his cigar angrily. At sight of his host, he started up. He was a keen man, was Waters. He could sense money 1,000 miles away, and it was this buzzard keenness which had brought him to the Cornish ranch and made him Vance's right-hand man. There was much money to be spent. Waters would direct and plan the spending, and his commission would not be small. In the face of Vance he saw his own doom. "Waters," said Vance Cornish, "everything is going up in smoke. That damned girl Waters, we're ruined." "Tush," said Waters, smiling, though he had grown gray. "No one girl can ruin 2 middle-aged men with our senses developed. Sit down, man, and we'll figure a way out of this." End of chapter 37. Chapter 38 of Black Jack by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The fine gray head, the hawk-like, aristocratic face, and the superior manner of Waters procured him admission to many places where the ordinary man was barred. It secured him admission on this day to the office of Sheriff McGuire, though McGuire had refused to see his best friends. A proof of the perturbed state of his mind was that he accepted the proffered fresh cigar of Waters without comment or thanks. His mental troubles made him crisp to the point of rudeness. "I'm a tolerably busy man, Mr. Waters. I think they said your name was. Tell me what you want, and make it short, if you don't mind." "Not a bit, sir. I rarely waste many words. But I think on this occasion we have a subject in common that will interest you." Waters had come on what he felt was more or less a wild goose chase. The great object was to keep young Hollis from coming in contact with Elizabeth Cornish again. One such interview, as Vance Cornish had assured him, would restore the boy to the ranch, make him the heir to the estate, and turn Vance and his high ambitions out of doors. Also, the high commission of Mr. Waters would cease. With no plan in mind, he had rushed to the point of contact, and hoped to find some scheme after he arrived there. As for Vance, the latter would promise money, otherwise he was a shaken wreck of a man and of no use. But with money, Mr. Waters felt that he had the key to this world, and he was not without hope. 3 hours in the hotel of the town gave him many clues. 3 hours of casual gossip on the veranda of the same hotel had placed him in possession of about every fact, true or presumably true, that could be learned, and with the knowledge a plan sprang into his fertile brain. The worn, worried face of the sheriff had been like water on a dry field. He felt that the seed of his plan would immediately spring up and bear fruit. "And that thing we got in common," said the sheriff tersely. "It's this: young Terry Hollis." He let that shot go home without a follow-up, and was pleased to see the sheriff's forehead wrinkle with pain. "He's like a ghost haunting me," declared McGuire, with an attempted laugh that failed flatly. "Every time I turn around, someone throws this Hollis in my face. What is it now?" "Do you mind if I run over the situation briefly as I understand it?" "Fire away." The sheriff settled back. He had forgotten his rush of business. As I understand it, you, Mr. McGuire, have the reputation of keeping your county clean of crime and scenes of violence." "Huh," grunted the sheriff. "Everyone says," went on Waters, "that no one except a man named Minter has done such work in meeting the criminal element on their own ground. You have kept your county peaceful. I believe that is true." "Huh," repeated McGuire. "Kind of soft soapy, but it ain't all wrong. There ain't been much going on in these parts since I started to clean things up." "Until recently," suggested Waters. The face of the sheriff darkened. "Well?" he asked aggressively. "And then 2 crimes in a row. First a gun brawl in broad daylight. Young Hollis shot a fellow named Larimer," snapped the sheriff viciously. "It was a square fight. Larimer forced the scrap." "I suppose so. Nevertheless, it was a gunfight. And next, 2 men raid the bank in the middle of your town, and in spite of you and of special guards, blow the door off a safe and gut the safe of its contents. Am I right?" The sheriff merely scowled. "It ain't clear to me yet," he declared, "how you and me get together on any topic we got in common. Looks sort of like we're just hearing one old yarn over and over again." "My dear sir," smiled Waters, "you have not allowed me to come to the crux of my story, which is that you and I have one great object in common, to dispose of this Terry Hollis. For I take it for granted that if you were to get rid of him, the people who criticize now would do nothing but cheer you. Am I right?" "If I could get him," sighed the sheriff. "Mr. Waters, give me time and I'll get him right enough. But the trouble with the gents around these parts is that they've been spoiled. I cleaned up all the bad ones so damn quick that they think I can do the same with every crook that comes along. But this Hollis is a slick one, I tell you. He covers his tracks, laughs in my face, and admits what he's done, when he talks to me, like he done the other day. But as far as evidence goes, I ain't got anything on him yet. But I'll get it." "And in the meantime," said Waters brutally, "they say that you're getting old." The sheriff became a brilliant purple. "Do they say that?" he muttered. "That's gratitude for you, Mr. Waters. After what I've done for 'em, they say I'm getting old just because I can't get anything on this slippery kid right off." He changed from purple to gray. To fail now and lose his position meant a ruined life, and Waters knew what was in his mind. "But if you got Terry Hollis, they'd be stronger behind you than ever." "Ah, wouldn't they, though? Tell me what a great gent I was, quick as a flash." He sneered at the thought of public opinion. "And you see," said Waters, "where I come in is that I have a plan for getting this Hollis you desire so much." "You do?" He rose and grasped the arm of Waters. "You do?" Waters nodded. "It's this way. I understand that he killed Larimer, and Larimer's older brother is the one who is rousing public opinion against you. Am I right?" "The dog. Yes, you're right." "Then get Larimer to send Terry Hollis an invitation to come down into town and to meet him face to face in a gunfight. I understand this Hollis is a daredevil sort and wouldn't refuse an invitation of that nature. He'd have to respond or else lose his growing reputation as a man-eater." "Man-eater? Why, Bud Larimer wouldn't be more'n a mouthful for him. Sure, he'd come to town, and he'd clean up quick, but Larimer ain't fool enough to send such an invite." "You don't understand me," persisted Waters patiently. "What I mean is this. Larimer sends the challenge, if you wish to call it that. He takes up a certain position, say in a public place. You and your men, if you wish, are posted near by, but out of view, when young Hollis comes. When Terry Hollis arrives, the moment he touches a gun butt, you'll fill him full of lead and accuse him of using unfair play against Larimer. Any excuse will do. The public want an end to young Hollis. They won't be particular with their questions." He found it difficult to meet the narrowed eyes of the sheriff. "What you want me to do," said the sheriff with slow effort, "is to set a trap, get Hollis into it, and then murder him?" "A brutal way of putting it, my dear fellow." "A true way," said the sheriff. But he was thinking, and Waters waited. When he spoke, his voice was soft enough to blend with the sheriff's thoughts without actually interrupting them. "You're not a youngster any more, Sheriff, and if you lose out here, your reputation is gone for good. You'll not have the time to rebuild it. Here is a chance for you not only to stop the evil rumors, but to fortify your past record with a new bit of work that will make people talk of you. They don't really care how you do it. They won't split hairs about the method. They want Hollis put out of the way. I say cast yourself away. Let Hollis come to meet Larrimer in a private room. You can arrange it with Larrimer yourself later on. You shoot from concealment the moment Hollis shows his face. It can be said that Larrimer did the shooting and beat Hollis to the draw. The glory of it will bribe Larrimer." The sheriff shook his head. Waters leaned forward. "My friend," he said, "I represent in this matter a wealthy man to whom the removal of Terry Hollis will be worth money. $5,000 cash, Sheriff." The sheriff moistened his lips and his eyes grew wide. He had lived long and worked hard and saved little. Yet he shook his head. $10,000, whispered Waters. "Cash." The sheriff groaned, rose, paced the room, and then slumped into a chair. "Tell Bud Larrimer I want to see him," he said. The following letter, which was received at the house of Joe Pollard, was indeed a gem of English. "Mr. Terry Black Jack, Sir, I got this to say. Since you done my brother dirt, I been looking for a chance to get even, and I ain't seen any chances coming my way, so I'm going to make one, which I mean that I'll be waiting for you in town today, and if you don't come, I'll let the boys know that you ain't only an ornery mean skunk, but a yellow-hearted dog also, which I beg to remain, yours very truly, Bud Larrimer. Terry Hollis read the letter and tossed it with laughter to Phil Marvin, who sat cross-legged on the floor mending a saddle, and Phil and the rest of the boys shook their heads over it. "What I can't make out," said Joe Pollard, voicing the sentiments of the rest, "is how Bud Larrimer, that's as slow as a plow horse with a gun, could ever find the guts to challenge Terry Hollis to a fair fight." Kate Pollard rose anxiously with a suggestion. Today or tomorrow at the latest she expected the arrival of Elizabeth Cornish, and so far it had been easy to keep Terry at the house. The gang was gorged with the loot of the Lewison robbery, and Terry's appetite for excitement had been cloyed by that event also. This strange challenge from the older Larrimer was the fly in the ointment. "It ain't hard to tell why he sent that challenge," she declared. "He has some sneaking plan up his sleeve. Dad, you know Bud Larrimer. He hasn't the nerve to fight a boy. How will he ever manage to stand up to Terry unless he's got hidden backing?" She herself did not know how accurately she was hitting off the situation, but she was drawing it as black as possible to hold Terry from accepting the challenge. It was her father who doubted her suggestion. "It sounds queer," he said, "but the gents of these parts don't make no ambushes while McGuire is around. He's a clean shooter, is McGuire, and he don't stand for no shady work with guns." Again Kate went to the attack. "But the sheriff would do anything to get Terry. You know that. And maybe he isn't so particular about how it's done. Dad, don't you let Terry make a step toward town." "I know something would happen, and even if they didn't ambush him, he would be outlawed even if he won the fight. No matter how fair he may fight, they won't stand for 2 killings in so short a time. You know that, Dad. They'd have a mob out here to lynch him." "You're right, Kate," nodded her father. "Terry, you'd better stay put." But Terry Hollis had risen and stretched himself to the full length of his height and extended his long arms sleepily. Every muscle played smoothly up his arms and along his shoulders. He was fit for action from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. "Partners," he announced gently, "no matter what Bud Larrimer has on his mind, I've got to go in and meet him. Maybe I can convince him without gun talk. I hope so, but it will have to be on the terms that he wants. I'll saddle up and lope into town." He started for the door. The other members of the Pollard gang looked at one another and shrugged their shoulders. Plainly the whole affair was a bad mess. If Terry shot Larrimer, he would certainly be followed by a lynching mob, because no self-respecting Western town could allow two members of its community to be dropped in quick succession by one man of an otherwise questionable past. No matter how fair the gunplay, just as Kate had said, the mob would rise. But on the other hand, how could Terry refuse to respond to such an invitation without compromising his reputation as a man without fear? There was nothing to do but fight. But Kate ran to her father. "Dad," she cried, "you've got to stop him." He looked into her drawn face in astonishment. "Look here, honey," he advised rather sternly. "Man talk is man talk, and man ways are man ways, and a girl like you can't understand. You keep out of this mess. It's bad enough without having your hand added." She saw there was nothing to be gained in this direction. She turned to the rest of the men. They watched her with blank faces. Not a man there but would have done much for the sake of a single smile. But how could they help? Desperately she ran to the door, jerked it open, and followed Terry to the stable. He had swung the saddle from its peg and slipped it over the back of El Sangre, and the great stallion turned to watch this perennial interesting operation. "Terry," she said, "I want 10 words with you." "I know what you want to say," he answered gently. "You want to make me stay away from town today. To tell you the truth, Kate, I hate to go in. I hate it like the devil. But what can I do? I have no grudge against Larrimer, but if he wants to talk about his brother's death, why, good Lord, Kate, I have to go in and listen, don't I? I can't dodge that responsibility." "It's a trick, Terry. I swear it's a trick. I can feel it." She dropped her hand nervously on the heavy revolver which she wore strapped at her hip, and fingered the gold chasing. Without her gun, ever since early girlhood, she had felt that her toilet was not complete. "It may be," he nodded thoughtfully, "and I appreciate the advice, Kate, but what would you have me do?" "Terry," she said eagerly, "you know what this means. You've killed once. If you go into town today, it means either that you kill or get killed, and one thing is about as bad as the other." Again he nodded. She was surprised that he would admit so much, but there were parts of his nature which plainly she had not yet reached to. "What difference does it make, Kate?" His voice fell into a profound gloom. "What difference? I can't change myself. I'm what I am. It's in the blood. I was born to this. I can't help it. I know that I'll lose in the end, but while I live I'll be happy a little while." She choked. But the sight of his drawing the cinches, the imminence of his departure, cleared her mind again. "Give me 2 minutes," she begged. "Not one," he answered. "Kate, you only make us both unhappy. Do you suppose I wouldn't change if I could?" He came to her and took her hands. "Honey, there are 1,000 things I'd like to say to you, but being what I am, I have no right to say them to you, never, or to any other woman. I'm born to be what I am, I tell you, Kate. The woman who raised me, who was mother to me, saw what I was going to be and turned me out like a dog. And I don't blame her. She was right." She grasped at the straw of hope. "Terry, that woman has changed her mind, you hear? She's lived heartbroken since she turned you out, and now she's coming for you, to beg you to come back to her. Terry, that's how much she's given up hope in you." But he drew back, his face growing dark. "You've been to see her, Kate? That's where you were when you were away those 4 days?" She dared not answer. He was trembling with hurt pride and rage. "You went to her. She thought I sent you, that I've grown ashamed of my own father, and that I want to beg her to take me back. Is that what she thinks?" He struck his hand across his forehead and groaned. God, I'd rather die than have her think it for a minute. Kate, how could you do it? I'd have trusted you always to do the right thing and the proud thing, and here you've shamed me. He turned to the horse, and El Sangre stepped out of the stall and into the shaft of sunlight that burned on him like blood-red fire. And beside him young Terry Hollis, straight as a pine and as strong, a glorious figure. It broke her heart to see him, knowing what was coming. Terry, if you ride down yonder, you're going to a dog's death. I swear you are, Terry. She stretched out her arms to him, but he turned to her with his hand on the pommel, and his face was like iron. I've made my choice. Will you stand aside, Kate? You're set on going? Nothing will change you? But I tell you, I'm going to change you. I'm only a girl, and I can't stop you with a girl's weapons. I'll do it with a man's. Terry, take the saddle off that horse and promise me you'll stay here till Elizabeth Cornish comes. Elizabeth Cornish? He laughed bitterly. When she comes, I'll be 100 miles away and bound farther off. That's final. You're wrong, she cried hysterically. You're going to stay here. You may throw away your share in yourself, but I have a share that I won't throw away. Terry, for the last time. He shook his head. She caught her breath with a sob. Someone was coming from the outside. She heard her father's deep-throated laughter. Whatever was done, she must do it quickly, and he must be stopped. The hand on the gun butt jerked up. The long gun flashed in her hand. Kate, cried Terry, good God, are you mad? Yes, she sobbed, mad. Will you stay? What infernal nonsense. The gun boomed hollowly in the narrow passage between mow and wall. El Sangre reared, a red flash in the sunlight, and landed far away in the shadow, trembling. But Terry Hollis had spun halfway around, swung by the heavy, tearing impact of the big slug, and then sank to the floor, where he sat clasping his torn thigh with both hands, his shoulder and head sagging against the wall. Joe Pollard, rushing in with an outcry, found the gun lying sparkling in the sunshine, and his daughter, hysterical and weeping, holding the wounded man in her arms. What in the name of? He roared. Accident, Joe, gasped Terry, fooling with Kate's gun and trying to spin with it. It went off, drilled me clean through the leg. That night, very late, in Joe Pollard's house, Terry Hollis lay on the bed with a dim light reaching to him from the hooded lamp in the corner of the room. His arms were stretched out on each side, and one hand held that of Kate, warm, soft, young, clasping his fingers feverishly and happily, and on the other side was the firm, cool pressure of the hand of Aunt Elizabeth. His mind was in a haze. Vaguely he perceived the gleam of tears on the face of Elizabeth, and he had heard her say, all the time I didn't know, Terry. I thought I was ashamed of the blood in you. But this girl opened my eyes. She told me the truth. The reason I took you in was because I loved that wild, fierce, gentle, terrible father of yours. If you have done a little of what he did, what does it matter? Nothing to me. Oh, Terry, nothing in the world to me, except that Kate brought me to my senses in time, bless her, and now I have you back, dear boy. He remembered smiling faintly and happily at that, and he said before he slept, it's a bit queer, isn't it? Even two wise women can't show a man that he's a fool. It takes a bullet to turn the trick. But when he went to sleep, his head turned a little from Elizabeth toward Kate, and the women raised their heads and looked at one another with filmy eyes. They both understood what that feeble gesture meant. It told much of the fine heart of Elizabeth, that she was able to smile at the girl and forgive her for having stolen again what she had restored. It was the breakup of the Pollard gang, the sudden disaffection of their newest and most brilliant member. Joe Pollard himself was financed by Elizabeth Cornish and opened a small string of small town hotels. "Which is just another angle of the road business," he often said, "except that the law works with you and not agin you." But he never quite recovered from the restoration of the Lewison money on which Elizabeth and Terry both insisted. Neither did Denver Pete. He left them in disgust and was never heard of again in those parts. And he always thereafter referred to Terry as a promising kid gone to waste. End of chapter 38. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. End of Black Jack by Max Brand.